Hey guys, welcome back to more homeowner association stories. In this video, an HOA banned my disabled kid from being in a public park, claiming that wheelchairs are banned. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one starts like this. So having a child with a disability can be stressful, but the hardest part for me personally are the people in the world that don't understand or know how to act. My child needs a wheelchair in order to get anywhere, and by just being in one, I've had more negative experiences with people than I can count. I've been to restaurants where people told me that I should not take my kid out to normal places. People treating my son like he is a baby instead of a 7-year-old because they assume he must be dumb or something due to not being able to walk. I've gotten dirty looks on the street or people telling me flat out that I must be a bad mother. His disability was due to a birth complication, so I spent years blaming myself and didn't need other people doing that kind of thing. I've had fights with my local HOA in the past when it came to making modifications that I needed for my son, like a ramp to get in and out of the house easily, and also bothering them to make the sidewalks more accessible, since not all of them have ramps to get on and off like they are supposed to. The HOA does not like that my son needs accommodation, and the worst thing I've heard have come from them actually. They once told me that my son should go away to school and it would be better if he was only living with me on holidays. That way I did not need to worry about accommodation. They were not just being ignorant about it either, they were flat out being offensive and knowing that they were doing it. They did not want a kid in a wheelchair to be seen by prospective home buyers, also telling me maybe I should keep him indoors and homeschool him. My son loves school and the other kids don't have any issues getting along with him or understanding that he is not that different. He can be in a normal classroom and has never had issues there being bullied or anything. The HOA had a big project being built for about 3 years before it finally opened. It was a public park that was open to the neighborhood since it was a mandatory HOA and we all basically were the ones paying for it. It was nice to have an outside space that was fenced in to not worry about cars or anything like that. I took my son there and was disappointed but not surprised to see that there was nothing really accessible for him to do. Things like wheelchair swings are not required, so I was not expecting anything he could use, but it was still a little disappointing. So I really hope in the future it's normal for parks. My son still liked going to the park since there was a lot of open space that we could throw a baseball around in. We learned to adapt, so it was still a really fun place that we were going to about twice a week. After a few weeks of sticking to a pretty similar schedule, we go to the park and one of the HOA board members was at the gate and stopped us. I figured he wanted to just see my ID to prove I was within the neighborhood or a neighborhood member, since I heard a couple times other people not knowing and trying to come in. So I went to get my ID, but he stopped me. HOA, I don't need your ID, I need you to leave. Me, if you're worried about me being part of the neighborhood, I can show you that I am. HOA, we know who you are. And we know about him. He pointed his head towards my son, like he was gesturing to an animal or something. So then, Mama Bear goes into full effect the moment I think somebody is about to start messing with my son. Me, what is that supposed to mean? HOA, we want everybody to have a good time here, and they can't if they have to look at him. It is depressing and he doesn't belong here. Me, as a member of the HOA, we have every right to be here. HOA, you can go in, but not him. We have a strict no wheelchair rule now in effect for this park. Me, do you have any idea how illegal that is? Not to mention just seriously effed up? He cannot help being in a chair. HOA, there are places for kids like him. Idiot parks where he can play and normal kids don't have to look at him. He did the worst thing possible by using the R slur to describe my son, plus implying that he was not a normal kid just because he was in a wheelchair. I try and watch my mouth because the last thing I want is my 7-year-old picking up bad words and spreading it around the school, otherwise I would have cursed this man out so badly, the next few lines would just end up being censored words. Me, I'm tired of you pretentious people thinking that discrimination is fine as long as you can twist around some kind of justification to yourself. I'm gonna leave, but I promise the second I do, you will wish to go back in time to this exact moment and change things. I left and had to explain to my son why we couldn't go into the park. It's not an easy thing to explain to a kid, but I don't sugarcoat it much because I know this is his life and things he will always have to deal with. I told him that the people in charge are scared of people that look different and are trying to make rules that say he can be excluded, making sure that he understands that they are wrong and that there's nothing about him that deserves the hate. I found a lawyer that specializes in ADA cases and told them the entire situation. I knew that this was gonna be open and shut because of their blatant discrimination. The law states that no person with a disability is allowed to be turned away from, in this case, a public park. Even though it was semi-private in the sense that it was only for those within the HOA, it still was public since there was nothing like membership or anything. Even if there was, I don't think they could deny us buying in due to him being disabled. Either way, we took the HOA to court and also decided to make a huge stink about it, so everybody knew exactly what was happening here. We got it in the local newspaper and some people came to us saying that they think it was disgusting what the HOA was doing to us. During the time of the lawsuit, there was actually a boycott of the park by a large number of people that were refusing to use it unless my son was allowed to go back in. It felt nice to have some support, even though a few people were backing up the HOA actually and saying that my son should not be allowed in the park. When it came time for court, the HOA was trying to claim that my son was not banned because he was disabled, but instead that the problem was that his wheelchair messed up the grass and it was not fair for people to pay for a nice park with their HOA dues only to have tire marks on it, adding also that he could run over kids and end up hurting them. It was a weak excuse that had zero thought, but I guess they had to try something. They must not have known the sheer power that the ADA has. The judge told him that they were not allowed to discriminate for any reason, and my son had just as much of a right as anybody else to use the park. So now they did not have a choice but to let him in, but things did not exactly stop there. With his name in the papers, the high-ranking HOA member that started this whole fight was forced to step down from his position. He was being painted as an ableist that hated anybody that was different. He got a bad reputation due to his actions that he deserved to have and faced the natural consequences of it. My son was happy to use the park again, and I was happy to show him at a young age that he had rights and should not let people stop him. And here, ripe stars, I'm happy that OP taught this ridiculous HOA a lesson, and it is just disgusting to see HOAs discriminating against disabled people. The next one is titled, "Getting Engaged Has Ruined My Relationship." And before we continue, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already to not miss any of my awesome daily uploads. My partner and I have been together for nearly 6 years. He has honestly been the most amazing, wonderful and supportive person in my life. He doesn't just make me happier, he makes me healthier. He has been absolutely fantastic in every way imaginable. About 2 years ago, we had the big marriage talk. We were both honest about what we wanted. He admitted that getting married made him so nervous. He has literally never seen a successful marriage. Every marriage he has ever witnessed has either ended in disastrous divorce or very sad premature death. I said I would stay with him whatever he chose, but there are some things I wouldn't do unless we were married. Just as he's seen too many marriages fail, I've seen too many loved ones be abandoned by men once the kids come along or when he finds a better option. In other words, as long as we were not married, no kids and our finances remain strictly untangled from each other. He proposed to me a few months after that, and since then he has turned into an absolute nightmare. First, he refuses to do anything wedding related, but accuses me of taking over and being a bridezilla when I make decisions without him. He does things behind my back, like inviting our friend who has 4 kids to bring the children, when we agreed the only exception to the no kids rule would be my niece, who will be 3 months old and for obvious reasons cannot be separated from my sister for the weekend. I can swallow that frustration, but he has also become hypercritical. Any mess around the house, even if he made it, if I haven't cleaned it up by the time he gets home, he refuses to talk to me. I work from home, so I usually do a lot of the chores like the dishwasher in my lunch break, but sometimes I don't have time. This is a busy time of year, and while my job is usually constrained to the 9 to 5, in the last few weeks I've had to work until 8 or 9. When he stormed in last night angry that he had to clean the kitchen, and I pointed out I'd been working for 12 hours straight, he looked me in the eyes and said, "So?" Well, he has threatened to throw me out the house and call off the engagement 4 times, and he has stopped initiating sex. I have come to dread the sound of the door unlocking because he cannot go 5 minutes without finding a problem to have with me. It's so bad that my mom, who was ready to adopt him a year ago, is refusing to be the witness that signs our marriage certificate. I have asked to call off the wedding, go back to being just girlfriend and boyfriend, but he says he really does want to get married, and he's just doing all of this to make sure he is making the right choice. Increasingly though, all he has done is convince me that I'm making the wrong one. Edit: if it wasn't clear, I'd already decided not to marry him when I made this post. I'm just packing up and going to my mom's for now. I'm safe and I don't need anyone to call the cops. A user in the comments said, he is abusive and he was always gonna be abusive once he felt that he had locked you down. This is who he is. You cannot stay with him because of who he used to be, because he is not that person anymore. He will likely never be that person again. Then OP responded, it's really hard to believe that he was trying to lock me down. If anything, I had to kind of convince him to propose. But yeah, I'm not planning to marry this man anymore. More comments from OP. OP when told to not convince someone to marry you if they don't want to. Comment number 1. I mean, when we discussed, I told him I would be perfectly happy not getting married if he didn't want to. I knew he feels generally disillusioned with marriage. I just simply wasn't willing to commit to something like kids or a mortgage if he could not honestly say that he was planning on staying with me for the rest of our lives. Nothing would have happened if he hadn't asked me. Did he agree to marry only for financial reasons? And then OP answered, I don't think so. I've thought a lot about that, and at the time he proposed we knew his grandma was gonna pass away soon. We were renting the house next door to her, and while we knew that he would inherit the house we were living in, the two houses had slowly merged gardens in the 10 years he and his grandma had been living next to each other. The two houses have been in the family since the 30s, so he was quite keen on buying next door to both avoid losing it, the family member who inherited it couldn't afford to keep it, but also because having a stranger live there would have been a huge privacy issue for both houses. We had hoped to rent it to a friend or another family member. He does earn a lot more than me, but he is self-employed, so the banks are quite wary of loaning to him. I work in a university which the bank considers a safe professional job, so getting credit and loans would have been much easier if he had been married to me. Thinking back on it, I wonder if he asked me not to, because it was something he wanted per se, but just something that made sense. We had been together for a while, so it made sense to keep moving forward. It made financial sense and his family liked me. I am not a perfect partner or person, but weighing it all up, marrying me had lots of factual advantages for him. I even have dual American citizenship and he had always dreamt of moving to America one day. Update to the story. Sorry for the wait folks, I've had a lot to do. So this has honestly been one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I'm back in with my parents, which is awful. I hate it. I feel like a teenager again. They are being very supportive and I'm grateful I had somewhere to go, but the house is so damn loud and I forgot what it was like. I'm trying to find an affordable apartment, but it's London, so that feels like a bit of a pipe dream. To top it all off, cancelling a wedding a month before is expensive. Only the celebrant and the photographer have accepted refunds. Every other vendor has been paid in full, and that's money just flushed down the toilet. It's been exhausting. Before this, I was in a pretty great financial situation, and well, I had savings and a plan and a house and a financially stable partner. Now I have less than a tenth of my savings, nowhere to live, and no real prospect for the future. It's not easy processing losing him, not easy at all. I'm still in part where everything makes me cry and you feel like someone has taken scissors to your soul, but I've experienced both grief and breakups. I know this feeling will eventually fade, even if it might never completely disappear. When it's mixed in with the relief of being able to exist without criticism every 5 minutes, I'm hopeful it will pass sooner rather than later. But I have no experience for this kind of existential fear of being alone, not having the family I wanted for so long, and not knowing what is next. Actually trying to date someone. When I was little, I never knew what I wanted from my career other than I had one, but I always knew I wanted to be a mom. That dream feels like it's getting further and further away every day. I have no experience for this burning embarrassment of telling everyone in your life that the wedding they were invited to is not happening. It was so painful telling his niece and nephew that I was not gonna be seeing them again. They cried and clung to me and begged me not to go, and they ripped my heart out. It's easy on Reddit to tell someone to end things, but when you've built a life together, disentangling is so bloody difficult. A divorce would be easier because then we would have a legal framework for all of this. Instead though, I have to decide if I want to take him to court for the custody of my cat when I don't have a proper place to house her, but still she is my cat. You might have noticed that I've really avoided talking about my ex, and well, we are communicating through our parents. He tried to reach out several times, but if I talk to him, I know I will do what I always do. I will buckle and take him back because I love him very much. I've been in therapy, again courtesy of my parents, and my therapist has to keep reminding me to love myself more than I love him. I miss him anyway. He has promised to change, promised couples counseling, promised that he knows that he was wrong. But he also has not said the word sorry yet. Such a small word and yet so telling. He's been generally pretty accommodating to me. Expenses have been split 50-50, which is fair, but certainly a worse deal for me. He left the house so I could gather my things in peace. I can tell from the state of it this has hit him hard too. The cats have been the only sticking point and I understand why. The house is old and creaks, being there alone is not fun. Neither of us liked it when we were alone, and a large part of the reason we got cats was for the company at night when the other was away. And the next one is titled The Worst Neighbor Karen. This happened just last night, so it is still fresh in my mind. It was Friday night, me and my roommates got super high and then realized that we were out of food. Well, high people food like fruit roll-ups, gushers, popcorn, and so we did a rundown to the Duane Reade a few blocks down. For those outside of Manhattan, that store is Walgreens, just New York City style. Now, location is important. We live just off of Park Avenue, yes, bougie as F, but me and my roommates live in the crappiest walk-up on the block. We are on the 3rd floor, with the 1st floor having a crappy Irish pub and the 2nd floor having a psychic and a happy ending Korean spa. Which, by the way, only opens after 7 PM. So, not exactly ballers, but most of our neighbors are. And the people in the neighborhood after working hours are almost all exclusively rich white people. Now, back to me being really high. It is cold, so before me and my roommates head out, I change into my favorite onesie. My neighbor Tororo onesie. And we walk out to the store a few blocks down. Then we get there, and me being super high, I am super indecisive and I am staring at a lot of fruit snacks. I take one and then I put it back and then I take another and then put that one back, and for like 10 minutes. Then a Karen comes around. I did not notice her. I was bent down, butt out with my tail in the air. "Excuse me," she says loudly, but I ignore her because I'm choosing food. She clears her throat again and says, "Excuse me, stop what you're doing. I need your help." Me, okay, then go find it. Karen, "Well, you work here, so you can help." Me trying to be polite and hide the fact that I'm super high. No I don't? What gave you that idea? I'm not even in uniform. And also, this is Duane Reade, a corporate convenience store. Every worker has to wear a uniform to prevent mishaps like these from happening. Karen, "Well, you're My roommate Freddy shows up out of nowhere and goes, "Because you're black." And well, this part of town I guess has not figured out that POC can live here too without being the help. Karen then turns bright red and then runs out of the store. And then I start dying of laughter. I mean, of all the people that would not be working right now, I'm pretty sure I would be one of them, especially with my Tororo onesie. All's well that ends well though. I got my snacks and even went next door to McDonald's and got a milkshake and fries. The machine was not broken for once. And then this morning on my jog walk around the block, who did I run into but Karen? I gave her a nice smile and wave. She did not return it. The next one is titled, "I'm not cleaning, I live here." So this happened on a Saturday morning. I live in a nice brand new apartment. It is great and the few neighbors I've met have been pretty chill, with a few exceptions. Earlier in the week, some new neighbors moved into one of the apartments. Their movers left the front door open, and while they were moving furniture in, a whole bunch of dead leaves from outside blew into the hallway. It was a huge mess. My apartment is literally the first door once you enter the building, and every time I've come home since I've been walking on dead leaves. We do have cleaners who come in about once or twice a week to clean the common areas, but Saturday morning as I was cleaning my apartment, I decided to pop outside and sweep up some of the leaves. I decided to leave most of them for the cleaners and only focus on the ones that were between the entrance and my door and a few leaves around there. Figured it is not my job to clean the whole place and I'd just take care of the leaves that were bothering me. Well, one of my neighbors saw me sweeping up in my PJs with bedhead and decided I was one of the cleaners. She saw that I was tying up my garbage bag and folding up my broom and dustpan. They sort of fold together for compact storage. Crazy woman, "Hey, you're not done. Why are you getting ready to leave?" Me, hi, I'm done. I was only sweeping the place between the hallway and my apartment. CB, "Well, that's just lazy. Do your job and sweep the rest of the hallway. It's been filthy for days." Me, "Yeah, I know, it's been filthy. That's why I decided to clean the spot between the front door and my door." CB, "You live here? So why do you only clean once or twice a week?"
If you live here, you should be cleaning every day. Stop being so lazy.
Me? Ma'am, I'm not a cleaner, I'm a resident. The mess in the hallway bothered me, so I cleaned the part that was annoying me. If the rest of it bothers you, then clean it yourself. CB,
how dare you? I'm going to call corporate and have you fired and thrown out of this building.
Me? Ma'am, I own this apartment and I own my own business. I don't work for our apartment's body corp organization and I'm not a cleaner. I live here, the mess bothered me, so I cleaned it. If the rest of the mess bothers you, then clean it. I'm not your servant and I'm not going to do it for you. CB,
well then why are you cleaning the hallway? You think I'm stupid? No one would clean the hallway unless they're getting paid.
Me, or unless they don't want to track dead leaves into their home every time they get back. CB,
well, if you're doing this on your own, you won't mind sweeping up the rest of the hall, so do it.
Me? Yeah, no. Had you asked me politely, I might have considered it. But after this exchange, you can either do it yourself or wait for the cleaners to come do it. I'm gonna go back inside and continue cleaning my place. Nice meeting you, though. I walked in and she started banging on my door for a while, but I just threw some Disturbed on my stereo and let David Drayman drown out the witch's knocks. It did not end well though. I went out later to throw away my trash in the dumpster downstairs. The crazy witch, I suspect did not actually see her, but who else would it be, had swept all the leaves in front of my door. So I grabbed my trusty broom and swept them all further down the hall to her. I have a feeling we are gonna be playing this game until the cleaners show up and maybe I'll borrow my buddy's leaf blower and just rev it up outside her door. It's pretty loud. And now guys, I have prepared a compilation of some of the best stories we have ever read, and of course that means that maybe some of you have heard these stories before, because that is the nature of a compilation. But anyway, feel free to listen to this while falling asleep, while working, and so on. I spent years having issues with my HOA, and one of the people on the board, being my neighbor, actually made the entire thing worse. She was a pest, and the main reason the HOA knew I was doing minor things and trying to fine me for it. This woman had nothing better to do with her life than watch her neighbors and cause problems for them. I noticed that in the time I was living next door to her, she had several boyfriends, so my guess is that her crappy personality extends to all aspects of her life. Due to having fines from them before, I was on the HOA radar in a sense, and I had to be careful when I wanted to make any changes to my home or yard. I truly felt they were more of a detriment to the community than a helpful thing. Like with all the money they took from us, I never saw a single improvement being made that came from them and the money we put in. To me, it felt like extra taxes, and with state and federal taxes, I did not need an additional HOA tax. There were not a lot of fences in the neighborhood, but I needed to build one for my backyard. Something to seal my backyard in for my dogs so they cannot go to the front yard or off the property. I don't like the idea of an electric collar, invisible fence, and would rather just have a normal one. It also might help the situation of my neighbor wanting to be in my business. Something I need to mention about myself is that I have MS, and the reason I need a fence for my dogs is because it progressed to a point that I could not walk them anymore. I was on crutches and they needed time to be outside and run around. Not to mention, use the bathroom. The other thing about my MS is that it made me feel like spite was not really the right word to describe what my neighbor would do. I think gawking would be more appropriate and something I've come to expect from small children, but not grown adults. The last thing I want in my life is for people to stare at me because of my disability showing outward appearance. I knew that she had some issues with it, because the first time she saw me with crutches, she was making comments about how I was too young to need those and wanted pity. Followed the next time by telling me to take some oils and crystals in order to heal my legs. Not understanding what MS really was, or that those things do nothing but sucker people into a scheme. Anyway, back to the fence that I built for my dogs and a slight sense of privacy. I had the fence for a single day before a letter came in the mail from the HOA claiming that it was against policy for me to have the fence and I needed to get rid of it. Due to past issues with them, I did take the liberty of looking through the bylaws and what it said about fences. It had many rules regarding colors and height, and the main rule being that it could not fully surround the property. Meaning it could not be just a fence blocking the backyard all the way to the sidewalk. However, nothing I did with my fence broke the rules in their little booklet. I painted my fence white, which was an approved color, and I made sure it was actually much shorter than the maximum just for the reason of them not being able to throw a fit. I contacted them back and had to fill out a form claiming why I thought the fine they gave me was a mistake. It was not actually just a fine, but a notice to remove the fence or furthermore intense action would be taken against me. I assumed that meant more fines or trying to sue me over it. I never heard back about the form, but one day the HOA came with a bulldozer and removed my fence. I was lucky that the dogs were inside and not able to get hurt. I came out yelling at them, but they only told me that I was warned in the letter beforehand. I even brought up the form and that I was waiting for a response, only to be told that no response meant that my claim was denied. Which was of course total crap, and I knew it. I heard enough of HOAs and figured to just say screw it and get a lawyer. I know the HOAs must be getting in a lot of trouble because they have lawyers that specialize in this kind of thing. Maybe I'm just a little ignorant of the world, but it was news to me. I told him what happened and we filed a lawsuit against the HOA for unjust destruction of property. Of course, they were claiming that they were allowed to do it because the fence was against their rules. The case would end up being a fight between lawyers about the tiny differences between wording and what it meant in the bylaws. Stuff that is so boring, I'm just gonna fast forward right past it and get to the good stuff, aka the results. So the HOA was found to be in the wrong for destroying my fence, with their whole argument being that they needed to monitor my property and couldn't do this with a fence existing, even claiming the backyard counted as surrounding the entire property. Honestly, just garbage excuses from people that knew they were in the wrong and wanted to worm their way out of it. HOA board members should really consider a career in politics based on how they act. The HOA had to pay me a massive fine for the damage they caused and money lost from the fence. There was something even better than money I got from this case though. My lawyer found a loophole that if the HOA was found guilty in a lawsuit or something, I was able to get out of it. So despite it being a mandatory HOA, I was no longer a member and did not need to follow their rules. I took this to my full advantage when building my new fence so they could really have something to complain about. I painted my fence a nice green color that I loved and seemed to fit in well with the nature of outdoors. I also built it taller than they would have allowed me, not so much for the benefit of my dogs, but so now my neighbor could not spy or gawk at me over the fence at all. I knew that she was the one that reported me because she wanted to be able to see everything I was doing. Now she can see literally nothing with how tall my fence is, and while it is spiteful, it feels really good to get some revenge on them. I don't like revenge that ends up with other people being hurt or homeless or stuff like that. Just getting screwed over by the thing they complained about is the kind of revenge I thrive on. I'm happy it is what they got, and I never need to worry about the HOA fining me for minor things and being total dicks to me again. I was free from them, and the fact that they hated it just made it taste that much sweeter to me. And yeah, ripe stars, I'm so happy that OP got revenge on this terrible HOA, because honestly, if I was in OP's shoes, I also would not want any nosy, stupid HOA neighbors spying on me and gawking at me. And now let's continue to the pro-revenge story of today's video. So years ago I had a lunch thief. About the 12th time complaining to HR about people stealing my lunch, mandatory reporting every third or fourth instance, I was seething, not a damn thing was being done, and I still had to go buy something to eat. I was complaining to my doctor at the yearly checkup and he got a smile saying, "You're constipated then?" I was dumb and said, "No, why?" He wrote me a prescription for some holy F laxative with instructions to mix it in with your meal for maximum effect. At which point I knew the plan. I wish I could say that they shat their pants, but no, they ate my sandwich with special avocado sauce. About an hour after lunch, I went to HR and reported two things. One, my lunch was stolen again, and number two, my medication was stolen. HR, so you got hit by the lunch thief again and your medicine was in the bag? Me, yes, I've had some digestive problems and my doctor prescribed a powerful laxative and advised me to mix it in with my midday meal. HR going white. You what? Me smiling, I mixed in a prescription-grade laxative with my food per doctor's orders. Well, being that stealing prescribed medication is a criminal offense, the police were called and found the lead man from a department over absolutely crapping his brains out. He was furious and accused me of poisoning his food. I asked, "At which point did you get the idea that food was for you?" Continued, furthermore, now I no longer have my medication that I was prescribed for my condition. It was about this time that he knew he effed up and shut his mouth until he got a lawyer, or so I am told. It's a small town. One of my buddies from high school took his position, I can make and eat my hoagies, and I have no clue where the lunch thief went after his fines and community service. And wow, ripe stars, I am speechless. Indeed, the lunch thief in this story absolutely got what he deserved. Honestly, I don't even get the point of stealing other people's food. Are you really that hungry, or do you do it like for other reasons? I really don't get it. Anyway, the next one is a malicious compliance story. So a lot of lawyers are making the news with their bad decisions, which reminded me of a story I hope you enjoy. I had an appearance for a pre-trial hearing in a small town court. This hearing went okay for my client. The other attorney, opposing counsel or OC, did not react strongly, positively or negatively, which made sense, because the decision was basically a 60-40 split of what we were disputing. Neither of us was a big winner or loser. His demeanor changed drastically after the judge dismissed us. In the hallway, he stormed up to me while I was discussing the next steps with my client and said that we needed to talk. I said something along the lines of, "As soon as I'm done with my client." OC huffed off and I finished my talk. To set the stage for the next part, I'm almost exactly average for height and weight. Meanwhile, OC was probably 4-ish inches taller, 60-ish lbs heavier, and 30-ish years my senior. Imagine a big belly drinker's nose and some flop sweat if he saw the elevator was out of service. So I say goodbye to client and walked over. Without any small talk, he gave me something close to, "You think you can just walk in here and act like that?" This was confusing because nothing really went great or terrible for me or him. So I said something like, "Act like what?" This really set him off, and I pinky swear I was not trying to antagonize him with that question. OC then says verbatim, "You better hope I never see you outside this court because I will kick the crap out of you." What he did not know was that I really enjoy fighting. After seeing the Power Rangers punch those clay soldiers, I begged my parents for karate classes. After that was judo in high school, BJJ in college, and an attempt to fight in the UFC after college. I thought I was tough right up until actual professionals hit me. Then I thought, wow, I'm actually a huge coward, and went for a graduate degree. So I told OC, "Sounds good. We need to sign some forms first though. Here's my availability. Let's find a time and meet at this gym. Do you want boxing or grappling gloves?" I thought for sure he would make up an excuse, but he agreed. So we set up a time and everything, and the small town court gossip mill did its thing, and a couple of court staff showed up to watch the fight. In an anticlimactic turn of events, OC was a no-call, no-show, and the next time OC and I appeared before the judge, who did not show up to watch the fight, the judge made a snarky comment like, "Is this really worth fighting over?" And OC did not have anything to say to that. And the next one is an Am I the A-hole story, and of course it has a full update and conclusion, so please watch until the end to see everything. So I, 42 female, have a successful career and inherited a decent amount of money from my late husband. I'm nowhere close to being a millionaire or something, but it's enough so that as long as I'm smart with the money, to only work because I want to by the time I hit 45. That is including any college expenses my 2 children may have in the future, so long as they go to a state college. Family knows that I have money, and while I don't mind giving a couple $100 here and there, because I know I most likely won't get it back, I draw the line at anything above $400. They know this, but that still does not stop them from trying, and I've always stayed firm on this. Well, once the pandemic, my brother-in-law, 35 male, lost his job, and my sister's, 37 female, job have reduced her hours until further notice. 2 weeks ago, I got a call from my mom asking if I could come over. I had no problem with this and swung by the next day and found my sister already there, and I could tell she had been crying. Based on the title, you all know where this is going. So with me, her and both our parents there, my sister informed me that even though her job was expected to go back to regular work hours in early 2021, there was a rumor that they would also be downsizing. She wasn't sure if her job would be secure, and brother-in-law still has not found any luck in getting a new job yet. I knew what they wanted and tried to play dumb at first and offered to help find brother-in-law and my sister's jobs. My sister said that was very generous of me and she would take the offer, but in the meantime what they really needed was a loan. My sister asked for at least $40,000 to help with paying off their credit card, managing the mortgage, make payments towards their student loans again, and still have some money left over in case the worst happened. I was quick to tell them that they were asking a lot from me, that while I did have some money, I just didn't have $40,000 laying around to give out on a whim. I told them that I would have to check my finances and think about it. After 2 days, I started getting inquiring texts from my parents and sister and told them that I was busy this week and that I would let them know over the weekend. I checked the numbers and it was cutting it a little close, but it was doable. However, I still did not like the idea of just giving the money away without any reassurances that I would get it back. So I drew up a rough draft of a contract and emailed it to my sister, stating that I was willing to give her money after she signed the final draft of the contract and that the money would have to be given in 3 separate installments. My family was furious and said that as the older sister, it was my duty to look out for my sister in her time of need, and to make her sign a contract was offensive. I countered with that since my sister has never paid me back whenever I loaned her money before, since the day I married my husband, I think this was more than fair. Everyone is still angry with me, so I just wanted a more neutral perspective. Am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. I would say the only offensive thing here is asking family members for $40,000. Damn, this family is so toxic and entitled, I feel really bad for OP. Anyway, some people on Reddit said, not the a-hole, $40,000? Is she kidding? Sounds like she needs to downsize her life. Also, you are really smart by getting that in writing, because otherwise I don't think you were ever gonna see a cent of that money. In fact, you still might not, because she probably doesn't expect you to sue her for it. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, your money is yours to use as you see fit, and for an amount that size, I fully agree with your decision to make it legal. I would remind them that while you have money, the pandemic can affect everyone, and you, as far as I know, don't have a partner bringing in second income anymore. Also, the objection to the legal form is a huge red flag that you're never gonna see that money again. I would ask them why asking sister to sign a contract is offensive, but asking a sibling for $40K is not offensive. Update edit, wow, stepped away for a couple seconds and I wanted to say thanks for the support. Also, I keep seeing a few of the same questions pop up, so I'm gonna clarify and mention a couple of things. So, my sister and her husband cannot get a loan from the bank, or at least not much, because their credit is not the best right now. To my sister and brother-in-law's credit, they did have some savings, but are burning through it since my brother-in-law is currently out of work and my sister does not work enough hours right now. Also, they have kids. After I got married, my sister started making little jokes that compared to what my husband makes, what's a few couple dollars to family every now and then. Over the years, I gave my sister at least $2.5K that she never paid back, and I just stopped counting after a while because it would get me upset. I just made it a habit to stop giving her money, although I would still pay whenever we went out to restaurants, the movies or the spa. And by the way, sorry guys, I just have to interject here, it's very clear that the family is taking advantage of OP. She is way too nice. Honestly, if I lend someone, let's say $5 or something, which is basically nothing. However, if that person would forget to give me back that money, I would probably never lend them anything again. It's not really that much about the amount, but in my opinion, it is simply being respectful if you pay back what someone lent you. And clearly, OP's sister does not respect her. Anyway, edit number 2, okay, I had to step away again for personal stuff, and when I checked, I saw even more responses, all talking about how I would collect my money if my sister either refused or couldn't pay me back. I left that part out because I wanted to focus on just the idea of the contract itself rather than the technicality part. As previously stated, I emailed my sister a rough draft of the contract and was planning on having it notarized so that it was official, but as collateral I would have ownership of her and my brother-in-law's cars if they could not pay. I hope that clears a few things up. Final update, thanks to all the wonderful and helpful comments. I won't lie, familial pressure and guilt was getting to me a little bit because I realize how fortunate I am. I also wanted to apologize for downplaying my socio-economic status. I've just been living beneath my means for so long, I sometimes forget how fortunate I truly am. I just wanted to show my children the importance of being financially responsible and rarely ever splurge. In the end, I contacted my sister and brother-in-law for a sit-down, public so they couldn't cause too much of a scene, but private enough so we could vaguely discuss sensitive info, plus there was the social distancing involved. I simply did a basic laydown of the situation. I told them that I needed them to hear everything I had to say first, and if they interrupted me, I would walk away and not give them a cent. First I told them that it's good to help family when you can, but I couldn't give them 40k. I'm able to offer them $3,200 per month for at least 6 months, and I told them that I simply cannot afford any more without it affecting my kids and that I'm a mother before I'm a sister or daughter. I also told them that I cannot afford to bail them out every time they are in trouble, and that since the future is so uncertain, I may not always have the means to care for others. My money is gonna have strings attached, and if they didn't like it, they could go somewhere else. I made it clear that I was not doing this to be mean or controlling, but I wanna help my sister help herself. The rules were: number 1, the money would be deposited in a new joint bank account with one authorized signer. B, my sister and brother-in-law were gonna meet with a financial advisor, which I would pay for. C, since neither of them are working, it doesn't make sense to have 2 cars, so I expect them to sell one of them, and then our parents can let my sister or brother-in-law use one of their cars when they need it. Before they can get the first payment, they'll be having their meeting with the financial advisor, and I'll be in the meeting just so I know they went. I made it very clear that this is the best that I could give them. They looked upset, but I told them that beggars cannot be choosers. They said they would think about it, and I knew that my sister was gonna cry to our parents, so I called them as soon as I got in the car and just told them everything. I said I'm not changing my mind, and if they feel that my sister needs more than what I'm offering, they are more than happy to downsize and sell their own home or take out money from their own retirement and SSI, since family helps family, right? If there's an update, I will put it here as an edit. Edit for info, I keep seeing this just so we are clear. The $3,200 per month is gonna be a gift, and I told them that. I don't expect to ever see that money again, but I'm never gonna give my sister and brother-in-law another cent after this, and I'm prepared to go LC and NC with her over this. I know my parents will never go LC and NC with me because I'm their first choice when it comes to taking care of them when they get too old to take care of themselves. Edit for info number 2, forgot to mention that I don't really want sister and brother-in-law to sell one of the cars. It's just my way of putting pressure on brother-in-law to get a job, really any job. He has a master's and was making I think around 75k at minimum, and now he wants a job in the same field making the same amount or more. If we were not in a pandemic and he didn't have so much debt, I would understand him wanting to hold out for something better, but right now you do what you gotta do. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Jane and I spent 15 long years working multiple low-paying jobs to scrape together enough savings for a down payment on a home. We drove rundown old cars, rarely took vacations, and bargain shopped for second-hand furniture. Owning our own home was a distant dream that kept us going through all the hard work and scrimping. After all those years of perseverance, we finally saved up just enough for a fixer-upper place in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The day we got the keys and walked into our own home for the first time is one I will never forget. Jane squeezed my hand tightly, tears of joy in her eyes. The old house needed lots of work, peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, kitchen straight out of the 70s, but we didn't mind. I liked tinkering and Jane had a knack for interior design. Our weekends were spent painting walls, ripping up stained carpets, installing new cabinets. Slowly but surely, the place transformed. Jane had an eye for little details that made it homey and welcoming. She painted the kitchen a cheerful sunny yellow and decorated with rooster motifs. I, on the other hand, built rustic wooden shelves for all the cookbooks she loved thumbing through. Seeing our shared vision come to life through long days of hard work was incredibly fulfilling. This house represented our hopes, dreams, and years of striving for success. After 6 months of renovations, the house was finally move-in ready. To celebrate, we decided to take our first real vacation in years, 2 blissful weeks in Hawaii, courtesy of Jane's parents. It was the most carefree I had felt in ages. No work, no bills to worry about, just sunshine and fruity cocktails on the beach with my favorite person. The day before we left, a stern-looking woman showed up at our door introducing herself as Karen, president of the neighborhood HOA. I politely explained that we had not joined the HOA or agreed to any rules. But Karen insisted membership was mandatory and we owed $500 in late fees. Her entitled arrogant attitude shocked me. I firmly told her we would not be paying any HOA dues for an organization we did not even belong to. Karen huffed in annoyance, threatening serious consequences if we did not pay up within a week. I assured her we had no intention of giving in to her demands and firmly shut the door. Jane and I put the bizarre encounter out of our minds and happily headed to Hawaii, eager to relax. We spent 2 blissful weeks lounging on warm sand, swimming in clear water, and even enjoying sunset dinners. It was the first time in ages I felt free of stress and responsibility. Our idyllic vacation came to a shocking end when I got a call from our neighbor Tom, frantically telling me there was a raging fire consuming our house. Jane and I scrambled to pack and get the first flight back, anxiety knotting our stomachs. The entire trip was a panicked blur. Had flames engulfed our precious home and everything we had worked for? Stepping off the plane, the smell of smoke hung heavy in the air. Our worst fears were confirmed. Our lovingly renovated house was now a collapsed pile of blackened rubble. Jane broke down, sobbing that shook her whole body. I stood numbly beside her, the world seeming to move in slow motion. 15 years of hopes and dreams literally gone up in flames. According to the fire chief, the blaze was definitely arson. Traces of gasoline had been detected around the perimeter of the house. Jane and I were utterly devastated. We had lost not just a house, but years of painstaking work and priceless memories. Who could have done something so unspeakably cruel? The very next day, Karen showed up at the ruins of our home wearing a smug grin. She offered insincere condolences and then casually mentioned the HOA had voted to waive the usual fire cleanup fee for us as new members. Her callous gal stunned me. Before I could respond, Tom came over and told Karen he had personally witnessed her spraying gasoline around our house right before the fire erupted. Karen's smirk instantly vanished. She spluttered denials, but the fire investigators had already found clear evidence of gasoline arson. Tom, bless him, had provided the final damning piece. Still reeling from shock and grief, Jane and I knew we had to take action. Karen's monstrous crime could not go unpunished. We hired a tenacious lawyer, Albert, who assured us justice would be served. Albert helped us file a major lawsuit against Karen and the entire HOA board for arson, extortion, fraud, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I was wary about the costs, but Albert agreed to work pro bono, as appalled by Karen's deeds as we were. In the courtroom, Karen's arrogance was evident as she walked in grinning, sure she would evade consequences yet again. But Albert was a bulldog, fighting fiercely to expose Karen's culpability. Tom's eyewitness account left no doubt of her direct involvement in destroying our home. Albert also presented evidence of Karen terrorizing other neighbors over minor issues like lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. Her harsh punishments were part of a pattern of power-hungry tyranny. The judge listened stoically, his expression growing darker as Karen's misdeeds were laid out. In his final judgment, he denounced her as a reprehensible sociopath whose twisted actions had caused immeasurable pain and destruction. He sentenced her to 10 full years in state prison for arson. Her HOA accomplices also received multi-year sentences for their role in enabling and covering up her crimes. Jane and I wept with pure relief and vindication as Karen was led away in handcuffs, her tyrannical reign over the neighborhood finally over. The judge also ordered the HOA itself dissolved, its operations permanently banned in our county. He awarded us a substantial 7-figure settlement to cover damages, legal fees, and unthinkable emotional distress. With the settlement money, Jane and I rebuilt on the property we still owned. This new home had upgraded fire-resistant materials and high-tech security. We included little thoughtful touches to replace all that was lost. The yellow kitchen, my custom shelves, the quirky decor we had lovingly curated. Jane and I felt we could breathe easy again. Karen and her cronies could no longer touch us or terrorize our community. She wasted away in prison, stripped of power and influence. The HOA board members struggled to rebuild their lives after financial ruin. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, after a story like this, I would definitely run away if I was offered a house in an HOA, even for free. This was absolutely terrifying. Either way, the next one is a story from r/Am I the A-hole? It is titled, I Send My Mother to Prison. Am I the A-hole? My mother is in prison for defrauding the government for 10+ years, which finally caught up with her. About 2 years ago, I was subpoenaed by the court to testify and ended up being the testimonial that ultimately sent her to federal prison. She has been in prison for just over a year now. As a result, we are estranged. However, I was not given much of a choice because my current profession has strict legal requirements that I cannot risk bending or else I will lose everything. Fast forward to this past week, my maternal grandfather passed away suddenly from complications from a stroke he had 2 months ago. Everyone is sad and devastated, and it's been hard to reconcile the loss during the pandemic. A lot of prisons will grant furlough for those who wish to attend their loved one's funeral, something we already had to do back in February when my grandmother passed away. And I was the one who filled out the paperwork and was 100% responsible for my mother during her furlough. So once I received news of my grandfather's passing, I started on the paperwork but stopped because it turned out that my grandfather is going straight to cremation without a funeral or service because that's what my grandfather wanted. And I told my family that we were not furloughing my mother out because of the fact that there's no service or funeral. My family understood. Fast forward to today, when my sibling calls me to thank me for furloughing our mom out. Shocked and confused, I asked the obvious. What do you mean? It turns out, as I discovered by calling the prison, that my aunt busted my mother out of prison on falsified documents where they forged my signature and gave my contact info. And also told the prison that there was a funeral and that my mother's presence was required. Once, I live in a separate province, and two, there's not a funeral or service. There's absolutely no reason for her to be outside of prison during a pandemic. Especially so when prisons are virus hotspots. So I had to call the cops because if caught, I could lose my livelihood, my license, and a career I love. After all, my mother didn't want to grieve in prison and has zero regards for anyone else's health and well-being. I texted everyone in my family to encourage my aunt to get my mom back to prison, or I would have no choice but to call the cops and charge my aunt with identity theft and have a warrant issued for my mom. Something I don't really want to do. However, my family is calling me an insensitive a-hole for not allowing the family to get together to grieve because I cannot be there and I'm taking it out on them. So then I called my aunt directly and recorded the call and told her if she didn't return my mother to prison by noon tomorrow, I would call the cops and have them issue a warrant for my mother and have her charged with identity theft. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole for not allowing my family for using me to basically prison break my mother? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know what you think about this story. I don't think I've ever heard something like this again. A real-life prison break, so to say. Comment number 1, not the a-hole. Please stop giving these people chances. Call the cops, report the identity theft, and let the cops go after whoever. This is not your fault, and the longer you hesitate and give chances and worry you're an a-hole, the more likely it is that this will ruin your life. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, but call the cops and prison now and report it. Without the prison knowing what happened, what will stop them from doing something similar again and just telling everyone not to tell you? Don't risk it. Comment number 3, not the a-hole, and you should turn your aunt in regardless. She stole your identity, forged your signature, and potentially mixed your name up in a prisoner escape. No way, she should be sharing a cell with your mom. And now, thankfully, we have an update to the story. So I spoke to my lawyer and asked how it was possible for my aunt to pick up my mom from prison. It turns out, due to the pandemic, visitors are a no-no. In my case, inmates who are furloughed go through all the steps to leave, but the family members are outside waiting. And on a page I didn't see originally, they had my aunt's address as a potential address for my mom to stay, but it was put as a secondary, not as a primary. So I guess the ball was severely dropped, but I won't have definitive answers until I call on Monday. Update number 2, y'all, please stop assuming my brother is going to prison. He is a lot of things, but he wouldn't help my mom or aunt with this jailbreak. If anything, he is a grief-stricken victim who just wanted to see his mom for the first time since the pandemic and be sad about our grandfather, who is also, by the way, currently being an a-hole because he feels I should let them all grieve. It's a effed up situation, but my brother did nothing illegal. Calm down. Update number 3, my brother is a minor, 14 years old, so y'all, he couldn't furlough our mom out. Please stop asking. Also, I don't hate my mom. My mother gave me up when I was 11, but kept my other siblings and had more. Basically rehomed me to another family without getting the province involved. She had no parental rights to me because she signed them away to this family. During that time, while I was not in her custody, she continued to gather government benefits, claiming I was still with her. Benefits she claimed were beyond your basic child benefits, but other government money she was not entitled to. Also, I couldn't be as detailed as I wanted to because of the character limit. It all came crashing down about 3 years ago when she was arrested for fraud beyond $5,000, and then I was being investigated because of my mother's BS despite the fact that I wasn't even aware of any of this. Context: I reconnected with my grandpa when I was in university and we were very close. All of my siblings were told to testify. I didn't want to because I didn't want to be involved. I told the prosecution this, so they subpoenaed me. No, I cannot plead the fifth. That doesn't work here. Secondly, after many conversations I had with my own legal representation at the time, it was best that I testified, and so I did. During that time, her violent history was brought up, so y'all claiming she is a non-violent person is incorrect. She just got caught with a non-violent crime, which is actually violent because cases like this make it harder for people to collect benefits they are entitled to. Not to mention, she has a history of fraud that started with my grandmother, her own mother, and my grandfather, who by the way also testified against her. Trust me, nobody wanted to be involved in sending her to prison. All of this history led to her being sentenced to 5 years, which meant she ended up in federal prison because provincial prison is for sentences of 2 years and under. Federal is 2 or more. I don't even call her mom anymore, but did so in this post because of anonymity and simplicity. Why I bring up the pandemic? Well, we are still actively living in a pandemic regardless of whatever stages of reopening we are in. And by the way, this was an older story, of course. She hasn't been tested for the virus, and prisons are currently virus hotspots. So yes, I don't want her around my immunocompromised family members, which by the way includes my aunt who is battling breast cancer. I don't want people to die of the virus or even have it. She can grieve like everyone else is at home, but her home just happens to be a prison. I told all of this to the warden of the prison my mother is at, while also on the phone with the detective I spoke to yesterday and my lawyer. 2 investigations are now happening: who authorized my mom's furlough at the prison, and my aunt's identity theft, which I'll probably take a restorative justice path to, and whatever else the Crown decides to charge her with. I posted this for reassurance because my grief and helplessness were not offering me the ability to look at this objectively. So thank you all to everyone who said NTA, all of you who claimed YTA, you are all some serious trolls. And yeah, Ripe Star, sadly, that is the last update to this story. There's no further information, even though I actually tried for a long time before posting this story to contact the author. However, I never got any response back. But well, that's real life. You don't always have a conclusion to a story. The next one is titled Manager Malicious Compliance. So I work in mental health and substance use services. I've worked in my job for a long time now. My boss is never available for help and hardly on site. Recently, she has gotten a new manager who is not impressed with her work ethic, but then lockdown happened and he had to shield. She has gone straight back to her old ways. Boss will often ask me to do her work for her to save her coming in, which I've never minded doing up until recently. I had a meeting with my boss after an incident at work where someone tried to assault me. I told my boss I didn't feel supported by her after it had happened, as she wasn't present and didn't manage it well afterwards. In the middle of the meeting, boss says perhaps you want to consider some easier work in a different department. Me, what? Why? Boss, well, you do take on a lot of extra work that you don't need to do. A lot of this work is managers' jobs. Maybe you need to learn to say no to taking on all this work. I asked if there was something wrong with my standard of work, if she had concerns, etc., and she says no. 3 months down the line, 4 of the team leave and they get new people in. Boss, OOP, can you induct new starters on their first day? Me, sorry boss, that's a manager's job. Boss, can you complete fire risk assessment? Me, sorry boss, that's a manager's job. After a while, the boss stops asking me things, and then one day she's working from home. I'm pretty sure she has been telling her managers she's on site throughout lockdown, but mostly isn't. Huge incident kicks off with residents, emergency services are called, etc. I call the boss and explain to her what happened. Boss, OP, can you please do follow-up with commissioning bodies, staff and residents involved and write the report, send it all directly to me, please. Me, sorry boss, you will need to come in to manage this. I'm not a manager, that's not my job. Boss, just this once please. I refused to manage the incident. Turned out she was visiting a friend who lived at the coast while she was meant to be on site. Someone accidentally let slip to her manager when he called in the incident and there was no one to manage. He asked me to deal with the incident and I explained I couldn't and that the boss had reported me as taking on too much work to OH. A full investigation has been launched into her conduct and ability to do her job. Manager now talks to me directly and supervises me. He is helping me apply for a promotion. Boss is on leave pending investigation. I edited this story to show the difference between my boss and manager for those finding it hard to read. Also, to answer people who ask why I would do the boss's work in the first place, well, the residents still deserve support and to be given the best chances. If I can make that easier for them by taking on extra work, then I will do so. There's enough going on for people who come to us. They don't need things being messed up because others don't want to do their job. By the way, everyone who has used services, you guys are great too. Remember, take everything one day at a time and be super proud of yourselves every day. Don't be afraid to ask for support. There are lots of people who care out there for you. For people asking, yes, I now have a manager's job at a new service which I'm helping to create. My ex-manager went sick for several weeks and has not returned since. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I live in East Asia and I am seeing more HOAs than ever before. I personally don't understand the appeal and why it became so popular here. The area I lived in did not have any types of problems with safety or the community being connected. It just seems like a waste of time and money, but who knows, maybe I'm just missing something obvious. The neighborhood right near me got an HOA about 5 years ago and it started nothing but problems for me. So my farm is less in the neighborhood and more so next to it, close enough that I know a lot of the people and feel part of that area and not alone. I shouldn't have been shocked when I was offered to join the HOA, but I was. The H in HOA stands for home after all, and I would be the only farm in the entire thing. I did not want to join for a couple of reasons. So, number one, the smaller one being that I didn't see the point and there was no benefit for me. The bigger issue was that the HOA expected me to join and pay more than any other person since my land was larger. Basically, paying for multiple homes worth since my land covered that amount. I refused, thinking that what they were asking was horrible. That was when they started bothering me to join and eventually coming to my house one day with a very strange offer. Something I had a feeling they planned from the beginning. HOA leader: I want to come and talk to you again about joining. Me: I told you before that I was not interested. HOA leader: I know that you were upset about the cost. So we came together and found a solution that I think is fair. You only have to pay for the single home worth, but in exchange the HOA can use your land. Me: use my land? HOA leader: yes. You see, we want to build a well and your property would be the smartest place to do it. Then everybody could have easier access to water and nobody would be inconvenienced. Me: I would be inconvenienced though, losing some of my own land and also having it become my responsibility. You're not building anything on my land and I'm not joining the HOA. HOA leader: I've tried to be nice, but you're making that impossible. We need this well built on your land and it's gonna happen even if you don't like it. You can make it easy and join the HOA, or you can make it hard and we will find a way to get your land. I did not like the threats she made and kicked her off of my farm. Wanting me to join just for the money was low in my mind. It was even lower to want me to join to take advantage of me and try to use my property for themselves. Before anybody gets upset at me, there's other access to water where we live. It is just not as convenient. There's nothing stopping them from building a well somewhere else though to attain the same goal. It doesn't have to be on my property, they just want it to be. After that blow up, the HOA avoided me for a while and things cooled down. I got a call from my family in China a few months later, and due to personal reasons I had to go back there. I didn't know how long I was gonna end up being gone, but it was roughly a year before I was able to return to my farm. Leaving a farm for that long and needing to basically start over is not ideal, but I didn't have much of a choice. I was expecting the place to not look great, but what I was not expecting was for my house to no longer be standing. Instead, half destroyed in a sinkhole. Something that might have looked like an accident if it wasn't for the very obvious well that was not there when I left. I'm getting a little ahead of myself though, so let's rewind and talk about what the HOA did while I was away. Once they realized I wasn't coming back anytime soon, they basically took over my property for themselves, trespassing on it and even letting anybody else go on the land as well, calling it the community farm like it didn't have an actual owner. Then, since I wasn't there to protest any longer, they built the well that I had forbade them from building on my property. That alone would have been enough for me to want to sue them. It turns out that whatever idiot decided where to put the well did not do any work in making sure it was a good spot. It was way too close to my house and not in a secure location. It resulted in the land becoming so weak that it created a sinkhole and my house just collapsed. They did nothing about this either, so by the time I came back it had been like that for months already. I was furious and contacted a lawyer in order to sue the HOA for building that well and destroying my land, going after the HOA leader in particular since I knew she was the one behind the entire thing. I was told that I had a good case with the well not being there when I left and the HOA having many public announcements about my land being the community farm. The lawsuit was for trespassing, illegally building on my property, and being responsible for the destruction of my land and home. The HOA leader tried to reason that I had been gone for so long, the only explanation was that I had either died or abandoned the property. The HOA merrily took it over to make sure it stayed nice and an asset. This was total garbage, because when I left I made sure that I contacted the town to let them know to hold my mail and where I was going. If the farm really was abandoned, then the town would have been the ones to deal with it, not the HOA, since I was not even a member. Without that excuse to work off of, the rest of the case went in my favor rather quickly. The illegal well had no explanation besides the HOA claiming the neighborhood needed it, which by the way is not a reason that it had to be on my land, as I said before. They also caused the destruction and neglect of the land by letting the house collapse and then just leaving it to sit there in the hole, getting more destroyed by the day. The HOA had a case that was falling apart and decided to put the HOA leader under the bus to take the fall, claiming they all did what she said and had no idea about any of this. She was sent to jail for her criminal actions and the HOA was forced to pay me money to help restore my land. The only thing was that since the HOA was still fairly new, I had essentially bankrupted them. They had no idea what to do, and since the neighborhood would be angry that all their money went to a lawsuit settlement, the HOA only could do one thing. They thankfully disbanded and continued to just tell everybody that it was the HOA leader's fault to try and save their own skin. It really shows what a nice group I didn't want to join, turning on their own just to save themselves. The next one is titled, "Neighbor assaulted me for planting garden too close to the property line." So I've always loved gardening. Ever since I was a little kid, I would help my grandpa tend to his vegetable patch and flower beds. There's just something so rewarding about nurturing plants from tiny seeds into lush, vibrant greenery. As an adult, I was eager to start my own garden, but living in an apartment meant my outdoor space was limited to a couple of pots on my balcony. That all changed last year when my wife and I bought our first house. It had a decent-sized backyard and I couldn't wait to get my hands dirty, transforming it into my own little botanical oasis. I sketched out plans for raised vegetable beds, a flower border, and even a little pond feature. This was gonna be my gardener's paradise. On moving day, I went outside to survey the blank canvas awaiting me. Our backyard was separated from our neighbor John's by a chain link fence. John popped his head over and introduced himself. He seemed friendly enough at first. We made some small talk about me being new to the neighborhood before he disappeared back into his house. Over the next few weekends I worked diligently on my garden. I built cedar frame beds and planted tomatoes, peppers, herbs, leafy greens, you name it. For the flowers, I chose a mix of colorful annuals like marigolds and zinnias. I also added a small decorative pond with a little bubbling fountain. On one Saturday morning, I was out pruning my tomato vines when John came stomping over from next door. His friendly demeanor was gone, replaced with a scowl. "That garden bed is too close to my fence," he barked at me. I walked over to examine it. The bed was about a foot away from the chain link barrier between our properties. Hardly what I would consider encroaching. I politely explained this to John, but he was having none of it. "I don't want your damn plants touching my fence," he yelled. "Move it or I'll dig up every last weed in there myself." This seemed like a rather extreme reaction, but I tried to keep the peace. "Okay, no problem. I can scoot it over a bit so nothing is touching the fence. Sorry about that. And trim back that stupid tree while you're at it," John snapped before stomping back to his house. I looked over at the young crepe myrtle I had just planted. It was barely knee-high and nowhere near the fence. But again, I didn't want any more confrontation, so I gave it a little haircut to keep him happy. Over the next few weeks, John became increasingly hostile. Anytime I was outside, he would come up with some ridiculous complaint. Apparently, my fountain was too loud and he didn't like the smell of my compost bin. He even took issue with the route I took while mowing the lawn, insisting I switch directions to blow the grass clippings back into my own yard. I did my best to pacify him, even though his demands became more and more absurd. I shuffled all my beds as far from the fence as I could, I limited the fountain to only daytime hours, and I rerouted the mowing pattern. But nothing satisfied Grumpy John. The last straw came one morning when I was harvesting carrots for dinner. John came barreling out of his house, cursing up a storm. He was clutching a garden hose, which he proceeded to point at me, spraying me right in the face and drenching my freshly picked veggies. "Keep your filthy weeds out of my yard," he screamed as I shielded myself from the icy water. I looked down to see a single nasturtium vine had poked through the fence. One tiny stray foliage was apparently enough to send John into a rage. "That's it," I yelled back, finally at my limit. "I've tried to be reasonable, but you're taking this way too far over nothing." John's lips curled into a snarl and his beady eyes blazed with fury. He dropped the hose and lunged towards me, hands outstretched as if he was attempting to strangle me. Acting on pure instinct, I grabbed my metal trowel to block his attack. He ended up slamming his face right into it. The blow left him shrieking and blood pouring from his nose. "You psycho!" John howled, clutching his injured snout. "I'm calling the cops." Sure enough, a few minutes later I heard sirens approaching. An officer came and interviewed us both to get statements. I explained John's increasingly irrational behavior and how he had tried to assault me when I confronted him. "Is this true?" the cop asked John. "Did you initiate physical violence against your neighbor unprovoked?" "He was growing weeds," John cried defensively. "I had to keep them out of my yard." The officer sighed and asked if I wanted to press charges for the attempted attack. I decided it was not worth the hassle. Fortunately, he did warn John that any further incidents would lead to his arrest. After the authorities left, John quickly scurried back inside, clearly embarrassed by the whole debacle. He avoided me after that, discontinuing his watchdog routine. I doubt he wanted to risk another unsuccessful attack ending with a broken nose. Then, one night, I was startled awake by the shrill beep of the smoke detector. I rushed outside to find my beloved garden shed engulfed in flickering flames. As I stood there in shocked disbelief, John came barreling over. "Yeah, sorry about your shed," he said with a sneer, "but maybe all that fertilizer and gasoline you had stored in there wasn't safe." His admission stunned me, but before I could respond, the shriek of fire engine sirens filled the air. Within minutes, firefighters had the blaze extinguished. I told the police officer on scene that John had confessed to starting the fire. He was swiftly arrested and carted away in handcuffs. Thanks to John's reckless arson, I lost hundreds of dollars of tools and supplies along with my garden refuge. But the sweetest revenge came a few months later when I testified against him in court. The judge sentenced John to 5 years in prison for arson and destruction of property. With John safely behind bars, I happily replanted and rebuilt my garden oasis without fear of sabotage. His house sat vacant and neglected, overgrown with weeds that I left to flourish. After all his complaints about my plants, it felt poetic to let nature take back over the property of the man who tried to destroy my garden dreams. In the end, John's bitter jealousy and anger got him nothing but a prison jumpsuit. And the next one is titled "Satisfyingly Complied." I'm a corporate professional in middle management. My boss is a senior manager and he's horrible at his job. Peter principle totally applies. He's got his annual goals sent down from the corporate ether, and naturally, he added these things to my list of responsibilities. He would receive a hefty bonus for completing them. Meanwhile, I would receive none. He would take all the credit and tell me that I was lucky to have him as a mentor. He had this big shot personality. He was a smooth talker that acted like a celebrity, and he was just too important to be bothered by the people lower on the totem pole. He only wanted to interact with people he could brag about, and beyond puckering to kiss their behinds, he spent most of his time at work perusing dating apps. We were a very in-demand group within the company, and we had a revolving door of people coming to our area daily to get help from us. Non-management employees were not allowed to have cell phones and didn't have access to emails, so stopping in was their only option. My boss got furious if I wasn't in my office to catch all the traffic. Completing his goals for him required me to be out of my office. He demanded that I stay in my office for my full shift every single day and accused me of leaving the property and stealing company time, because if I wasn't in my office, how would he know that I was working? So then I complied. I stayed in my office. When his annual review came up, he lost his bonus. Because he didn't meet a single goal for the entire year, he fell under intense scrutiny. It was found that he was using company funds and resources to take these dating app encounters to expensive places and was expensing it as work-related. He also used company funds that were meant for a building upgrade to build a new patio at his house. He asked the contractor, a friend of his, to just do the work and find a way to add the money into the company bill. He was promptly fired. And the next one is another malicious compliance story. So I lived in a really horrible place that had an equally horrid property management team. I say team because they changed PMs whenever there was a problem. Nothing was ever done, and in the end there is a massive report against them with relevant authorities for their misconduct. But to the MC in question, property manager told me I had to have the carpets professionally cleaned, was not in the contract, or I would lose my $800 bond when I moved out. After some back and forth explaining I had used a professional carpet cleaning machine and was well experienced in doing vacate cleans, she insisted it must be an accredited carpet cleaner and that she would wait for an official receipt that had their ABN on it before approving the return for bond. I did some research and found out I could become an accredited carpet cleaner as there are no official licensing boards in my state. So I did what any sane person would do. I paid the $85, did the online course and got my certificate, registered a business name, ABN etc., all free via government program I was in at the time, handed the property management a copy of my accreditation and an invoice for services. I became a professional carpet cleaner and have since properly launched a vacate cleaning business that is still going 6 months later. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, a homeowner association invited over 160 people to my private property to cut down my Christmas trees while I was away. They stole my pine trees without permission and I sued them. I have a large amount of property and I won't lie and say I'm doing anything particularly productive with it. I will say that I have a ton of pine trees on the property and I make it a small mission of mine to have as many grow as possible. Too many people here are quick to cut down trees for every little inconvenience, like they don't actually provide us with the oxygen we breathe. Unlike my love for the trees, I have pure hate for the HOA in my area. They just really rub me the wrong way and are always the first people to try and cut down more trees and nature in order to build structures that we just don't need. I'm all for people having places to live, shop, eat, etc., but there really is a limit where you are destroying nature for nothing that important. I believe the last thing before this story really starts was them wanting to destroy natural land in order to build a baseball field. Just because the other one is all the way on the other side of town and people might not want to drive. You can agree or disagree with my position, which is the beauty of the internet. What I hope nobody will agree with is what the HOA did to my land one day. So see, they always hated how much of the area was my property and they could not touch or destroy it. Especially when I would not give in to even joining and giving them a smidgen of control. It was right in the middle of the pandemic and the holiday season was approaching. The HOA wanted to have some big event where the members could come and cut down their own Christmas trees to bring them home. And of course, people wanted a classic pine tree, but since the HOA destroyed most of them, the only big area to do it was my property. They figured that I would not miss or care about a huge number of trees going missing, and also there are over 160 members in this HOA, so we are not talking like 20 to 30 trees. The holidays came faster and soon the HOA got word out and hosted an entire weekend of people coming out and getting to cut and take their own Christmas trees away. You might be thinking right about now that I was an idiot for not stopping it right when it started. Or maybe living under a rock for not hearing about the event before it started. Some of you might even think that I could be to blame for allowing it all to happen. To answer all of these hypothetical questions, I need to explain where I was during this whole ordeal. Well, I had COVID and I was in the hospital hooked up to a ventilator, having no idea what was going on in the world around me. The HOA knew that I was not going to be able to stop it, so they went crazy and just did the entire thing without a shred of permission. Hell, when I got out, they did not even bother telling me what they did in case I just did not notice a huge chunk of my trees gone with their stumps still firmly planted in the ground. They did not even bother to get rid of those. I found out instead because I went on their website out of suspicion and they made posts bragging about the event and how it was such a big success. Posts before that giving people the address where to go, and I saved all of that in case it magically disappeared after I started getting back at them. This was like 2 months after Christmas, by the way, so they were relaxed and not worried about me coming after them at all. What was I gonna do anyway? Ask them to put the trees back? So I filed a lawsuit against them for illegal trespassing, chopping my trees without permission, and other damages like the leftover stumps. I even contacted some people that I'm friends with that are part of the HOA to try and find out more information about the entire thing. All of them were confused and were under a various number of impressions from things they were told by word of mouth from the HOA. Everything from it was a fundraiser and it was somehow gonna help pay my medical bills despite the trees being free, all the way to that I was part of organizing it and just wanted to make everybody happy for the holidays at the end of a horrible year. When I told them the truth, they felt horrible, but I did not blame the people at all. I blamed the HOA. I was right to save the posts because as soon as they got the lawsuit, they tried deleting everything they could off their website to make it seem like the event just did not exist. With modern technology, anything can be dug up again, so they were just making their own story look worse. It was not until our first meeting with the court that the HOA had any kind of story that made them look like not a-holes. Well, court via computer cams because COVID and everything. HOA lawyer: the HOA was under the impression that those trees were not on any owned property, instead just on unclaimed land in their jurisdiction. All they wanted to do was give the good nice families in the area a tree to try and give them a normal Christmas. I think after this year we have all been through enough, so you can understand that. My lawyer: if they assumed it was their property, then why did the address you gave for the location be the one of my client? Also, if the area did not have an address at all, according to you, furthermore, why do so many people that came claim that they knew it was his property and that you lied and claimed he was involved in the entire thing? HOA lawyer: well, we did try to contact your client to get him involved. He never got back to us, so we decided to move ahead and put it in his name because he was sick. My lawyer: more than sick, in a state unable to defend or speak for himself. Unable to tell your clients that they cannot cut down trees, which he has told them several times before, by the way. Trees that the HOA are well aware were on his property and went ahead and cut them down anyway. This went on until the HOA side realized they did not have anything they could use in their defense and they were gonna lose. We came to a settlement that I would not press charges against the trespassing counts if they paid for the damages they had done and also for the cost of the stump removal. After a bunch of boring back and forth between the lawyers, I got a settlement of $50,000. That might sound like a ton of money, but remember, it was a massive amount of trees cut down, so the cost really does add up. The thing that they could not win with the settlement was the reputation they now had among people. Taking advantage of somebody when they were sick to destroy their property did not go over well once the word got around. I had people messaging me and apologizing, offering me tree starters to plant. I told them all it was not needed, but I did appreciate it all. The HOA got so unpopular that they were basically being shunned. Due to pandemic messing with a lot of laws, they could get away without paying the HOA. Which is what all of them did until they didn't have enough money to even run the HOA and they were forced to shut it down. Officially, they called it taking a hiatus for the pandemic. It's been 3 years and I see no signs of it coming back, so for all intents and purposes, the HOA is gone. And here, ripe stars, maybe that was one of the things the pandemic was good for. Maybe it got rid of some homeowner associations. And the next one is another story, technically about something that is very similar to an HOA. However, it takes part in Venezuela. So, about 40 years ago, I was newly married to my wife and living on my family farm in Venezuela. It was not one of those giant farms, but it was passed down for generations and I really did love it. A perfect size to both make a living but also some time to spend with the family. My favorite part was that I had a really good view from my land of just salt wide open fields that the sun would rise over. In my mind, it was absolute perfection. HOAs did not actually exist here back then, but I don't really know what else I can call the group of people that I was having issues with. They were basically a small group that ran the entire area and took care of things. Well, maybe a fitting word would be mafia or militia or something. That's always what comes to my mind here. Anyway, they organized the events and made sure things would get repaired. That kind of stuff. Anyway, one day my wife got the mail and saw that inside was a letter with the HOA's semi-official seal on it. She was shaking as she read the letter and handed it to me to look at it. I can't remember exact wording of this many years later, but they were basically asserting claim over the farmland and saying that we had to move within 2 weeks. They might take care of the area, but they did not have any right to my land. There was nobody for us to really call because, like I said, they ran everything here. If I was to go into town and complain, I would just find one of the friends of them and they would tell me to move. I could understand my wife's fear, but I had anger instead. Nobody was gonna take my family farm away without a fight. After a couple of days of not knowing what to do, I just went into town anyway and stormed into the office. I'd never been to this place before, but let me tell you that they were trying way too hard to seem rich and fancy. The place reeked of bad cologne and tacky furniture. Sitting in the office was the head of the HOA, and I was gonna try and speak to him like a reasonable man. I told him that the letter must have been a mistake and my land does not actually belong to the town, so the HOA cannot take it just away and make us move. Besides, we don't even owe those guys any money because we take care of the land without any help. We are separate from the HOA and should not be getting any type of letter from them at all. He just told me that the letter was not a mistake and they were taking claim over the land. That I could either take my wife and move within 2 weeks or he would send men to force us out. I could tell that he was getting a ton of enjoyment from attempting to gain power over us. There was no reasoning with a man this evil. I was red in the face when I left the office and promised him that he would regret trying to mess around with me. I found myself a lawyer that was willing to help us with the limited money that we had. He was suspicious that there was a bigger scandal going on than just him trying to steal my land. He was not gonna only help me, but also try and dig as deep as he could into what they were up to. First, he was looking over the letter and documents from the HOA that was their evidence to take the land. He said that it was total garbage and anybody with a law degree would see that it was a mess and clearly not real. Looking more, he could see that our farm was valuable land and that they were looking to make a killing on it once they got a hold of it. We were not letting these thieves get away with stealing the farm. We also wanted to make sure that we had the last laugh after I experienced his cocky attitude before. Court was a total mess and it was clear how entitled this HOA thought they were in this case. They really figured their position gave them any kind of power to do anything they wanted. The thing was that they did not have a single piece of legal evidence that our lawyer did not poke a ton of holes into. To really drive it home, I was able to talk about how the farm was in my family for generations and I planned to have kids and start a family there. That I did not understand why they could be so cruel to kick us out just to make a quick buck. If we did not have the win in the bag before my speech, we for sure had it afterwards. My lawyer gave a great closing argument of just being that they ran the town didn't mean that they could take from people. That if they were meant to run the community, it was scary to have them in any control. He actually made the people scared to let that group keep running things because of what they had done to me. You can probably guess by now that we won in court and we're not gonna get kicked off the farm. It was actually better than that because the court decided to find the HOA members all guilty of forging fake documents, embezzling money that people were giving them, and even faking the repairs for the community, using cheap materials so they could take as much for themselves as possible. They all went to jail and I was left to run my farm with my wife. With those guys out of power, we had a new group come in that actually did want to help the community. They were honest, hardworking guys that did not end up doing anything wrong during their tenure in the position. After 40 years, there have been some good and bad people running things, but nobody was like that first group. Our story is kind of a local legend and might be stopping people from having ideas about trying the same. The story grew like the crops on my farm, and most versions I hear are exaggerated or have extra weird details, talking about us getting into a gunfight and other crazy stuff. I guess some people want things to always be as exciting as possible, so they stretch the truth. Personally, I think the story can hold on to the truth and does not need these fake add-ons. My wife, on the other hand, loves it when she hears a new variation and says if it helps to stop people from getting bad ideas, then it is fine with her. Also, in case anybody wonders, we are still living on that same farm, with our kids helping run it just like I wanted all those years ago. And by the way guys, if you're wondering, because the English was a little bit strange in some parts of the story, the original story was written in Spanish and I just put it through Google Translate, so maybe some small details got mixed up or something, but I still think it was a good story and definitely worth telling. Personally, I think it is interesting to have these stories from other countries as well and not only be limited to English stories. The next one is titled, Was I the A-hole to my wife? So my wife has been out of work since 2018. She had a mental breakdown during her 5th year of teaching. She has been going to therapy since, and we started marriage counseling during COVID. Reason for marriage counseling was because she thought I was pushing her too hard to go back to work before her and her therapist thought she was ready. I tried to explain many times that was not my intent, but realistically speaking, for me to keep up with expenses and retirement contributions, I pretty much have to take on extra shifts, which sometimes clock in over 18 hours a day, and on average I've been pulling 84-hour weeks. I've been doing this since she stopped working. We recently had a fight because I had an extremely rough week and had the conversation again about her going back to work. She opened up with the same line she always does. We don't feel it's the right time yet. She feels I have made great progress, and if I rush it, I run the risk of losing it. The we being her and the therapist. I told her I really don't give a damn what her therapist has to say, and I'm sick of you hiding behind her words whenever this topic comes up. She starts crying, tells me she doesn't like being this way either, and I'm belittling her due to suffering from mental health issues. I replied saying that I don't belittle you or take your issues seriously. The problem is I'm running myself ragged, and what happens if I have a mental breakdown? Do you think that I will have the luxury of not working? No, I will have to push through my demons. She said her therapist warned her this would happen sooner or later, and I would try to manipulate her into doing something that she was not ready to do. This is when I really lost it and just let it all out. I did not say anything kind. I told her that she insults me for thinking what I'm doing is manipulation. I told her I'm working these extra shifts so she can be home and BS playing games. I told during this entire time, you have not even made an effort to improve on certain skills. I told her she can still not cook to save her life and that I was sick of coming home after 12 or 18-hour days. Just make us dinner because her idea of making dinner is pretty a pre-made in the oven or ordering out. Among other things, that said, she stormed out of the house crying, yelling and shouting how I'm a piece of crap and rather see myself comfortable versus her getting better. So here I am. I don't feel at the core that I'm wrong, and while what I said was harsh, I think it did have to be said. So Reddit, was I the a-hole here? And here, ripe stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this pretty difficult situation. Do you think OP was being the a-hole here or not? Small update from OP by the way. Yes, I've been to a couple of sessions with my wife and her therapist. To be honest, it largely felt like I was getting ganged up on. My wife brought up how I was always tired, so I explained that I'm working harder to maintain our home. When I suggested part-time work would allow me to work less, their counter-suggestion was to cut things like saving for retirement and hold off on paying off debt and tackle such things after my wife gets better. Then I suggest renting out the house to cover the mortgage and we downsize to an apartment. Her therapist said such a drastic change to her environment could have a negative impact on her depression and advises against such a major life-changing event. During another session, she brought up how my suggestion that she tries cooking to save money is that we don't order so much. And that she felt insulted because in terms of money coming in, I'm making slightly more than our combined income and she was able to cover her expenses, so she doesn't understand why we are having such a hard time. I was honest, it has less to do with money per se and more so the fact that the amount of hours I have to work to maintain the income. I told her I'm pretty much working 2 full-time jobs. The cooking or doing things around the house was dropped fairly quickly and became a critic on how I cannot manage money since I'm making more, yet I never had issues when she was working with how she spent. More or less every session became what I could do to help my wife, and I get that her therapist has to look out for my wife and generally my concerns are small compared to my wife's. My wife is not a huge fan of our marriage counselor because she offers suggestions that go against her therapist. My friend has also suggested that I speak with a lawyer to see exactly what my options are. After reading many of the comments and thinking back on everything, I think I'm gonna do that. I love my wife and I know she is sick, but I'm good to no one if I keep up this pace. Final edit. Thank you so much for the replies. It was a slow morning, only had one field call, so I was looking over the thread with a colleague and a close friend. After talking, I have decided to put in a request for 2 weeks vacation. During that time, I'm gonna relax with my friends, go play some Baldur's Gate 3 and get my crap together. I'm gonna speak with a lawyer and see what my options are because I was young and dumb and much of her debt is mine because I co-signed and I have a joint account. I'll go to the doctor for the first time in 4 years and make sense everything is still working as it should. During this time, my friend said I could crash at their place, so I'm gonna take him up on that offer. This will be my final post here though. Going over this, I made this post for all the wrong reasons. Honestly, this is something that I shouldn't have posted publicly, and I was petty for that. Even so, I thank everyone because a lot of what was said was what I needed to hear. I don't have much in terms of a family, both my parents passed away, thanks for the tough love. Something has to change, and if my wife is unable, I have to do it. I'm young, I should be enjoying my life. I'm not even 30 yet, as my friend said. I aged so much in these last 5 years, it's scary. My friend showed me pictures from before all this happened, and I want to go back to the person I was then. I agree I was the a-hole for what I said, but I don't regret it. It was a wake-up call I needed. And some people in the comments said, not the a-hole, ask her what about your mental and physical health. Also, are you sure the therapist is actually validating everything like this? It sounds a lot like your wife is just saying, but my therapist says, to sort of add weight to what she says, and to accuse you of manipulation is ridiculous. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, mental health is important, but damn, she has not done anything? A cooked meal is the least I could do if I were not working and my spouse was. There's no way she's that crippled to the point where she can look at someone working 84 hours a week and imply they are the selfish one. Like this account, make her a throwaway too. And yeah, Ripe Stars, once again, let me know what you think about this story in the comments. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. If I were to write a story about the Karen that ran my HOA about a year ago, it would have been pretty tame. And by the way, if you're wondering about the censoring, I left some stuff out because honestly OP was sharing way too much personal info and I didn't want to dox him here on YouTube. Anyway, I would have honestly preferred it that way. It was the best kind of story I could be writing about Karen. Instead, I get to tell everybody out there how she went from just annoying to destroying my entire house. I don't know if a stereotype of Karen is that they are not bright, but let me tell you, this woman was an idiot. I'm saying I have no idea how she can legally drive or even survive day-to-day levels of stupidity. For one thing, she doesn't seem to understand how basic things work and instead makes them up in her little mind. For an example, she had one of the people in the neighborhood that works as a car mechanic see what was causing a weird noise. Since it was easily fixable, Karen decided that meant it was for free. Thinking if you didn't need to pay for an actual new part, then services would not just cost anything either. I am not just going off to make fun of her, it will become relevant later on, I promise. As I said before, Karen was spending time trying to get me to join the HOA and me explaining that I did not want to join over and over again. She was coming to me like she had the cure for cancer and was trying to sell it like it would save my life, boasting about the benefits and how I could not live without being part of the HOA. Like lady, I'm sorry to tell you, but it is not that serious. Your perks include coffee and donuts and the meetings. If you want to offer me something like free money or a car, then come and talk to me. I was here long before this HOA was formed and I did not see any changes happening from it being around. One day, Karen got one of her genius ideas to help the community and it involved removing all the trees in the neighborhood she could. Yes, her stupidity was showing again in thinking that people wanting to live in the suburbs would not want something as pesky as trees on their properties. Please try and close your eyes and imagine a generic suburb without a single tree. It looks eerie to me personally. In her mind, it would cause property values to skyrocket and she would be hailed as some kind of hero. Now, I didn't care in general what Karen did, but once she got me involved, I was not gonna just walk away. I was not home on the day she enacted her master plan, because if I was, I would have stopped her from going anywhere near my property. I doubt that she was allowed to destroy all the trees even on members' properties, but I knew for a damn fact that my property should have been off limits to her. I came home to find that my huge oak tree got cut down and ended up falling right onto the roof of my house. While I do believe in accidents and mistakes, I find it very suspicious that the only house this happened to was the one house not part of the HOA. But I will leave that to be neither here nor there for this story. The force of the tree caused my entire roof to collapse in as well as some of the siding to be destroyed. I couldn't even fully see the damage until I got somebody in to remove that damn tree. At that point, the HOA was claiming that they couldn't cover the cost of it since I was not a member, which just riled me up even more. It turns out that along with my roof, one of my major support beams got destroyed and the house was deemed not stable. I had to stay somewhere else, and that was a good idea because a few days later we had a small thunderstorm and it was enough for the rest of my house to go down as well. You can imagine I was beyond angry at Karen and was gonna take her ass to court for the cost of my house. I had insurance for my things, but as far as the house itself, I was not gonna get what happened covered. I had the basic things like insurance from floods and storms, but not from a Karen going full idiot on my property. At this point, I was not the only upset person because people missed the trees around their homes instead of loving it like Karen had predicted. Now, when I took her to court, that was when the biggest dumb comments came out of her mouth and I had to stop myself from laughing. See, she felt like she had zero responsibility for what happened to my home and the entire blame should be placed right on me. According to her, touching the trees didn't violate the fact that I wasn't part of the HOA because the trees are not part of the home. The H stands for home and she didn't understand that meant the entire property, not just the house. She really believed trees all belonged to the HOA since they were in the neighborhood and not a home. Then continued her logic, stating that the tree destroyed what was my home and since I was not a member, was responsible for my own home. It was the most backwards logic I ever heard in my life and the legal system was on my side for it. They told her that she had no right to go on my property or touch my trees without consent. I was being granted the full amount I asked for, which was $450,000, aka the cost of my home if it was on the market. That was not the end because the government was not happy about what she had done, removing all of the trees without any kind of permission from the city. I don't know about other countries, but where I live in Southern Asia, you have to go through channels if you want to do things like destroy every single tree. Due to her actions, she was reprimanded hard, but not sent to prison or anything crazy like that. What they did do was took away her power and demand that the HOA be taken apart because it was being used in ways that it shouldn't be. Karen was angry to be losing her power over people and getting to do anything she wanted. Also, she might have really not understood why her logic was wrong, because I cannot tell what is going on in that mind of hers. With the money I got, I was able to rebuild my house on my property. I also wrote to the city asking for new trees to be planted in the neighborhood after Karen tore them all down. It not only looked horrible, but it made everybody sad to not have that natural thing around us anymore. The city agreed and we got trees planted that one day will grow high like the old ones. All I can really say to this is never turn your back on a Karen you know has it in for you. Like I said before, I knew that she destroyed my house on purpose as a scheme, but I just could not prove it. Even if you have a Karen like mine that just seems stupid, she might surprise you and do something crazy. Always be on the lookout and keep your guard up because people, especially ones like Karen, are unpredictable. And here, ripe stars, indeed, always be careful when dealing with Karens, especially when they are your neighbors. The next one is titled, I just want a water meter. Posted by user illmilk6393 on r/ripe stories. So this happened back in 1984 or 1985 and my parents had bought a piece of land in a neighboring county with plans to build a house. My father drank water all the time and liked the big city water from where we currently lived. He asked the big city water to install 2 water meters for him and the other house being built on the property. He was prepared to pay the price for both water meters because he didn't like the small town water. Big City Waterman told my dad that they wouldn't install new water meters even though they supplied water to the neighborhood behind my parents' property. The main water line, which went to the neighborhood, was on the edge of my parents' property. My father thought about it for a while and then decided to go to the small county courthouse and did some digging in records. When he found the information he wanted, he made a call to the Big City Waterman again and asked for 2 water meters. Again, he was told no. My father was very calm when he told the man, "Sir, you have a water line supplying the neighborhood behind me on the edge of my property. I checked with the courthouse and your company did not obtain an easement for that water line on my property. So if you don't want to install the 2 water meters I have requested, I will get my tractor and plow up your water lines and not allow you to replace them on my property. And by the way, have a good day, sir." My dad hung up the phone and walked away. Then my dad had to leave on a business trip and the man finally called my mother, begging her to ask my dad to not plow up the lines. Big City Waterman told her that the ground was too frozen to install the meters and to please give him time to allow the ground to thaw. My mother agreed. The realtor who sold my parents the property and who was also the previous owner of the property finally called to ask my dad to come in and sign the easement before the meters were installed. This realtor was known to do dirty work. My father declined and told him that after the meters were installed and water was working properly, he would sign the forms. As soon as the ground was thawed enough, my father paid for the 2 Big City water meters and made sure we had water service and then went and signed the easement. And the next one is titled, Revenge on Crazy Employer. So I work in China as an English teacher. There are hundreds of great jobs out here, but at least an equal portion of people trying to screw you in every possible way. Each company I've worked with has been an education in paperwork, contract negotiations, and leverage. 6 years in, I would like to think that I'm finally getting the hang of it. 6 years working here is not unheard of, but it's rare, and my level of education and job experience, plus the standard white face, sells for quite a premium here. At this private school, I am one of 3 foreign teachers, a job that carries a lot of prestige locally and brings in a lot of students, read dollars. As only certain schools are even permitted to hire foreigners and even less can afford and find them. During recruitment periods, parents are paraded into my classroom and I'm sometimes given bonuses because of how often I'm complimented on my energy, teaching style, and even handsomeness. This matters in China. By the way, I am not handsome, but white in rural China is auto-handsome. The other foreign teachers here are African, and yes, there's a substantial racial bias and they get paid much less than me. I've chosen this school because it got the lowest cost of living area with the highest offered salary, but most importantly, the highest amount of free time. I work about 20 hours per week, save 70% of my salary, and spend the rest traveling. I had negotiated a very competitive salary. I also signed a non-standard contract that I had personally edited. I was proud of myself, at least until I arrived at the school and the international staff liaison immediately asked me to sign their standard contract. The earlier one was a mistake and could not be submitted for my visa. I now knew that this was one of those schools. I had heard stories. They would do anything to screw over foreigners. I pulled up my big boy britches. I needed to be prepared, but I wasn't. Initially, I did not even read their standard contract. It offered me only 2/3 of my agreed upon salary, so I told them to update that. They returned days later and I read it. A horrific document that would lose me, my Christmas holiday, a great luxury in China, my salaried status, a shift to per class pay with no pay for cancelled classes, and even allow them to charge me if I leave without finishing my contract. More terrifying still? Additional activities or events could be assigned without pay or notice, apparently at any time. The contract would also require me to locate another foreign teacher replacement before allowing me to sever employment, and also prevented me from leaving the school for any competing school in China. "Everyone signs it," was chanted at me by 4 separate workers, all of the English speakers in the building, each appalled that I was arguing. I informed them, I'm not everyone. We'll stick to my contract. I found out later, everyone apparently does sign it, they just don't bother following it. The other foreign teachers just run away on payday. The school has lost more than 10 teachers this way. 4 individual attempts were made to rewrite the standard contract to include what I had negotiated for. Each new version left out new things. I hate to ignore Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice that which is adequately explained by stupidity. But we were approaching the edge of Occam's razor here. The simplest explanation is usually true. God, I prayed they were only stupid. By the end, I simply wrote the contract using their format, except by then, we were 6 months into the school year. Operating that long without an official contract in China is dangerous and can allow the government to seize my so-called illegal wages. But there were just 3 more months until summer vacation. Except that is when the school decided that they didn't want to pay my summer salary. Now, my paperwork clearly said that I was a salaried employee and that I was to be paid whether they had classes or not. Summer had no classes, I pointed out, but they still get paid. I hadn't anticipated them creating a summer school just to give me classes. But the dates for summer holiday was not specified, so I lost 3 weeks of my vacation to their summer classes. At the meeting where I debated the ambiguities in the contract seeking some discussion, a meeting of the minds, the boss lady simply demanded, "Will you comply with the contract you signed or not?" This remains the most English and the only grammatical English she's ever spoken within my hearing. Would I do what I signed up for? I would, but contract negotiations were already starting for the school year by now, beginning in only 2 months. I had not been prepared before, but I was determined to get my 3 weeks back. The initial plan was to set my demand so high that eventually insisting on getting 3 weeks vacation or 3 weeks extra pay would seem reasonable. I rejected the 3 contracts they offered me, each one a version I had already seen and refused the year before. The Foreign Staff Liaison, FL, suggested that I again write the contract myself, so I would be happy with it. I sighed and uttered a reluctant "fine, don't mind if I do." I had 3 contract versions sent to them by the end of the day. They were just modified versions of my last 3 employers, but they were written in amateur and heavy English legalese. Poor ESL, English second language workers, never had a chance. They balked. So now my email clearly explained that each contract offered different benefits, each a separate option I would accept. One gave me less classes per week, one provided substantial penalty fees for each week my salary was delayed, and one insisted that my holiday salary for the year 3 months be paid immediately. Additional benefits tossed in at random, sick days, penalties for not giving notice of cancelled classes and holidays, as opposed to the less than 24-hour notice I had usually received. I even added my water and electric bill, cafeteria meal card and internet to the list. Overwhelmed by the complexity of the documents, FL asked for the 3 to be combined into a single document. I did, again reminding them that they contained several options, and this time adding that it was really an initial negotiating position. I'm quite certain that reminder was never read, and well, I combined the documents. Every potentially reasonable request I had managed to concoct over 2 months were thrown together into the final draft. I imagine FL having quite a heart attack upon reading it, knowing that sending it to the boss was akin to a suicide attempt. And that is when they stopped paying me. I had now agreed to working 1 summer month, okay 3 weeks, free, as it should have been a holiday, and how I had worked another month but payday arrived without them paying my salary. My legal options were pretty unknown to me, it's not my legal system and I can barely parse a Chinese sentence, much less read legalese. So I continued to work and occasionally remind them about needing to be paid. As I neared 2 months behind in salary, we began negotiations. So these contract negotiations were more stressful than any breakup I've ever had. First I would be called into the office, berated for being ungrateful, usually for hours, have it explained that I was being unreasonable, told precisely how much each of the workers in the office made, fractions of my salary, and then asked to make some concessions. I told them they would receive concessions only if they made some proportionate concessions on their end. And by the way, this is China, none of the people I was talking to were authorized to make any concessions, they were just aware the boss lady/owner aka HRH, Her Royal Highness, were not happy with my requests or perhaps would be not happy. I still don't know if they ever read the contract, but there was nothing they could do. I started playing games on my laptop while waiting for them to run out of stamina. I racked up 120 plus hours on this game. Wake up, go to class, go to meetings and get yelled at. Then lunch break, go home, nap, return in the afternoon for a repeat performance. I had this for an entire 2 weeks with little variation. Well, sometimes the meetings were before class and sometimes the meetings were after. Variety is the spice of life. I began to look forward to classes as they were a reason to escape meetings. Finally, someone must have decided I was not gonna budge and the contract was sent to the boss for approval. My demands had been shuffled, reworded and buried in paragraphs, but the content was largely unchanged. HRH immediately made a 6+ hour trip to the school from Beijing for our meeting. Upon her arrival, HRH stood for a photo session with me. I was given chocolate, wine, the ceremonial position of vice principal, and the promise of a raise. I had not even considered a raise. I made way too much for the region as it was. However, it had been promised, so I added it onto my next draft. The meetings lasted 3 days on and off, although my time with her was less than 3 hours total, because we were constantly interrupted by investors, new students, parents, etc. On the 3rd day, I left the meeting for lunch with the regretful promise that I would begin looking for work elsewhere. I already had 4 interviews scheduled for the afternoon. Nope, sorry, I couldn't possibly return to the meetings. I've already scheduled an interview until 4. And yes, I know it's important, but I've already scheduled the meeting. Okay, no, I have a meeting. Yeah, I understand. No, I still have a meeting. I'll come over immediately after. Oh, HRH wants to talk? Sorry, I still have an interview. No, I won't cancel. Yes, HRH is very busy. Well, it's very kind of you to finally give me that promised raise, but I've promised to have these meetings and I keep my promises. Bye. Between interviews, I'm sorry, I have an interview now and I cannot answer your direct message. But yeah, some sick days is reasonable. I've gotta go, that'd be nice. The WeChat, Chinese Skype and Facebook call is starting. Bye. I arrived to a very different meeting. So what ended up happening was, my boss was sitting in a room of 6 police officers with a pile of money on the table bigger than a large suitcase. I was certain she was paying them to arrest me. Oh crap, I thought. HRH is real hardcore. What the hell was I doing? I was told that I was not allowed to leave the school, that my contract only allowed me to work for her, and I agreed that that might be the case, and suddenly I was in a very agreeable mood and asked if I could read that part in the contract I had signed. She picked up the contract and began scanning. The contract said no such thing, but her face never changed as she scanned the substantially altered standard contract. Everyone in the room pretended that we were not paying attention to her. She finished scanning and there was a glance at the FL. Yes, you will only work for me. She asked me what the other schools were offering salary-wise and I told her. She rounded up the number and tossed 2 watts of cash to me and I turned to continue her conversation with the police. Bring his contract, we are signing it now. A worker snatched the money from my hands and counted out my very late salary. The poor staff, they were still unprepared. They brought the combined version of the contract that I had emailed, aka my first final draft. HRH did not even glance at it before signing. I got everything I could have thought to ask for. I celebrated for 2 weeks in Thailand. Epilogue: FL has an easier job, same pay, in a different school now. We are still not friends, but she told me she is grateful to not work here anymore. She won't say it's my fault, that's not Chinese culture, but I'm 99% sure it is. I've bought her gifts, 2 until she stopped accepting them, and this year I promised no new demands in my contract, I just wanted my salary. However, there were still some changes. First, since I've accumulated an additional 80% of my yearly salary in fines, they failed to pay my 3 months holiday salary up front, I've had my contract reviewed by a Chinese lawyer. It may be not eloquent, online translated Chinese, but it would hold up in court. To be honest though, I still feel bad about them signing that insane contract, so I'm holding to the stated intention in the penalties. This year, as an addendum I added, as the penalty is meant to be corrective rather than punitive, so as long as my wages and the wages of my fellow employees are paid on time, the missing fines from last year will not be assessed. All fines will become due, including all subsequent late fees, if any teacher can demonstrate that they've not been paid by the 15th. I calculate that weekly fines will have pushed my punitive figures to 200% of my yearly salary by that time. They asked for one change. I was the only staff member with Christmas off and it was breeding resentment. Instead of Christmas and Christmas Eve, could I accept instead holiday days in lieu? I wrote the addendum myself. I wrote, upon request of Party A, instead of the Christmas holiday, Party B will receive an additional 12 paid holiday days. 12. The addendum was returned signed and I can only assume HRH is still not reading my contracts before signing. I am now up to 4 months paid holidays and yesterday I sent the Excel spreadsheet with the complete calculations of all fines from last year. There was a panic until I restated the reminder that the fines will not be assessed so long as I cannot validate any complaints about myself or my friends and co-workers not being paid on time. I was assured again it would not ever happen. And here ripe stars, damn, what a kerfuffle. Honestly, I cannot understand why this school did not just fire this guy. I mean, props to him for getting all this malicious compliance and revenge, but honestly, if I had to deal this guy from the perspective of a Chinese school director or something, I would instantly fire him. And you know guys, funny coincidence actually, as some of you might know, I have studied education in university and by trade I'm actually a teacher, but nowadays I just do YouTube. But from very early on, like when I was 15 or 16, I always knew I wanted to teach English in a foreign country, not in my home country. However, the country I wanted to teach in changed over time. I think the first country I wanted to go to was Japan, then it shifted to Korea because I thought that I'm not good at using chopsticks, and Korea was pretty much only interesting for me because I really loved Korean video games at the time. And then for a long time it actually shifted to the plan that China would be my dream destination to teach English in. But then after all these years, for some reason I ended up in Thailand. And to be honest, it was mainly for the food, from food vloggers such as Mark Wiens, Food Rangers and others. They convinced me that Thailand is the best place to go to. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. So I'm a disabled guy who needs a wheelchair to get around. My boyfriend and I moved in this neighborhood almost a year ago and it's been quite the journey. My boyfriend's family who lives nearby have been absolute stars in helping us settle in. They even installed a ramp in our driveway so I can easily move around and do my work. Especially when my boyfriend is out. As much as I try to focus on the positive, there are a few neighbors who just cannot seem to accept me for who I am. I'm well aware that my disability might be part of the reason that they look down on me, but it stings me even more because I know my sexuality plays a role too. It was just a few months after we moved when this pesky neighbor's mother came back from whatever trip she had gone to. According to the neighbor who is friendly to us, this woman, who was by every definition a Karen, was part of this neighborhood's HOA and has been a nightmare for almost everyone. We had been discussing if we should become part of this HOA, but after hearing about her behavior, we decided to not go through with it. But that didn't mean this Karen, or her HOA, would leave us alone. One sunny afternoon, my boyfriend and I were watering the plants in our yard and having a playful water fight when Karen came marching over to our property. She started loudly complaining to my boyfriend about how we were disturbing the peace in the neighborhood. She then looked straight at me in my wheelchair and had the nerve to say, "If you have enough strength to get down and dirty with your boyfriend, then you should stop pretending to be disabled." Now that was way out of line, and it made me hate her and her HOA minions even more. My boyfriend, bless his heart, stood up for me and told her to F off. But things escalated quickly after Karen tripped over the ramp while walking away. She started throwing all kinds of homophobic and ableist slurs my way. It was infuriating to say the least. My boyfriend, who was already fuming, warned Karen that if she ever dares say anything like this to me again, he would contact the police. Karen, clearly not expecting things to go to the cops, sputtered for words before attempting to save face. She threatened to call the cops on us first, claiming that we were being indecent in public. The damn audacity, I swear. After that incident with Karen, she and her family seemed to steer clear of us. I convinced my boyfriend not to file a case, but we did decide to talk to the neighbors who had been kind towards us to keep them in the loop. As summer rolled in, we noticed Karen and her family packing their bags and leaving. They looked like they were heading for a vacation, and honestly, part of me was relieved that they would be away for a while, because my boyfriend also had to leave for a few weeks due to work commitments. My boyfriend's parents and sister dropped by often, making sure I did not feel lonely in his absence. The week leading up to my boyfriend's return was relatively quiet, but that peace did not last long as Karen's family returned. That day I had planned to water the plants in the yard, but their arrival made me hesitate. I know it was cowardly and I didn't like that I was trying to hide from her, so I talked to my boyfriend about the situation and he was as supportive as ever. He assured me that his sister would come over to provide moral support, and he advised me to carry a pepper spray just in case I felt threatened. The next day I was ready for the confrontation, but thankfully Karen did not approach me. She did notice me and I could see her murmuring something to her HOA friends who were hanging out in front of her property. In the end, I watered my plants in peace, and also my boyfriend's sister arrived soon after and offered to drive me to her parents' place so I can spend some time with them. I was all too happy to accept, and it was then that Karen and her friends approached us like some hungry hyenas. As Karen kept coming way too close to me, my boyfriend's sister stepped between me and her. My boyfriend's sister, "Back up, what do you need?" Karen, "Couldn't you people get a better ramp than this piece of junk? Not only is his wheelchair an eyesore, this ramp is equally ugly." My boyfriend's sister, "Sorry, the Barbie-themed ramp we ordered is still in the making." Karen, "Oh, you got a mouth on you, huh? Your brother brought this ugly disabled idiot into our neighborhood, disturbed our peace, and made this whole place look cheap, and you have the audacity to talk back?" My boyfriend's sister, "I have the audacity to do much more than talk back, you hack." As much as I appreciated my boyfriend's sister standing up for me, it was clear that we were outnumbered by Karen and her friends. I gently touched her wrists, silently signaling to her to end the conversation. Thankfully, she got the message and headed straight to the driver's seat, even as Karen and her friends continued to mock us. I wanted to get away as soon as possible and help myself into the seat with the help of my legs. And yes, I could still use my legs, not for walking or standing too long, but many disabled people have small tasks their limbs can do despite their condition. I didn't even look back as I closed the door and we drove away, hopefully to return to a better day tomorrow. Sadly, no such thing happened, and when I returned home the next morning, I found my wheelchair ramp completely destroyed. My boyfriend's dad had come to drop me off, and when he saw the ruins, I suggested to ask the neighbors if they knew anything, but he immediately went to the Karen's house and told me to stay here. I tried to stop him, but he had already walked away and banged loudly on Karen's door. I could see Karen come out and start screaming at him, but he shouted back. My boyfriend's dad, "Who do you think you are to destroy my son's property? Karen, your son is faking his disability. I saw him stand up on his 2 legs yesterday. He's pretending to be disabled just to get sympathy and attention. I will not let him fool and devalue my neighborhood that he decided to barge in. My boyfriend's dead. We will see how long this remains your neighborhood." He then walked away, even as Karen came out of her house and followed him. He wheeled me inside the house and told me to call the cops, that I immediately did. I could hear shouting outside, and it seemed like Karen had gathered her HOA minions and was trying to force my dad to apologize, or she would file a case on me for breaking the HOA rules. The only issue is, we are not even a part of it. The police arrived in about 15 minutes, during which my boyfriend's dad had come inside and sat beside me. He held my hand as they shook slightly and told me to sue Karen, everything else he would manage. I nodded, and when the police arrived, Karen was quick to approach them and say how I was fooling everyone and doing indecent things with my boyfriend in public. My boyfriend's dad intervened and told Karen to shut up before gesturing towards me. I took a deep breath and told the police officer everything that had happened since Karen came back. We also had the recording from the cameras that we showed them and even presented our neighbors as witnesses. We were told to file a report in the station, and my boyfriend's dad agreed to drive me there. As this all happened, Karen continuously tried to interrupt us and paint me as the bad guy, so the police asked her to come to the station as well. She looked pale at the mention of police station and, as we had predicted, did not arrive. Instead, she sent someone from the HOA. As I had all the evidences against her and some other members of the HOA breaking the ramp in the early morning, Karen was sentenced to jail. Since this whole incident involved other HOA members, they too were sent behind bars and the whole HOA got dissolved. My boyfriend was there the next day when police officers came to arrest Karen. She was making a scene, screaming and shouting slurs at me, showing everyone what kind of a person she was. Her family accused us of bribing the police and threatened to take this matter to court. However, no letter ever arrived at our doorstep, and after a few months the family moved away for good. Either way, the next one is titled "Karen Set Fire to My Barn After Declaring It an Eyesore. She Thinks She Owns My Entire Farm." So I've lived on the same farmland for as long as I can remember. My parents raised me here and their parents before them. This land has been a part of my family's identity and livelihood for generations. But despite the farm being in my family for over a century, our neighbor Karen seems to think she owns the place. So she is a middle-aged woman who inherited her property next door from her parents, but seems to feel entitled to even more. Ever since we first met her, Karen has been trying to exert authority over my family and our farm. She complains about the noise of our farm equipment and animals despite living next to working farmland. She insists on being consulted about any changes we make to the property, even minor ones. And if we dare to disagree with her ridiculous demands, she threatens to report us to the authorities. For years we humored her and tried to remain civil, but Karen's sense of entitlement only grew worse. She started randomly walking onto our land uninvited, criticizing our farming practices and insisting that we make improvements she deemed necessary. When we told her to leave our farm, she threw a tantrum and actually called the cops on us for harassing her. A confrontation with the cops finally made it clear to Karen that she had no claim over our farm, but her hostility did not subside. Then a few weeks ago, her spiteful behavior escalated into something truly evil. She marched right up to our barn and declared that it was an eyesore that needed to be demolished at once. When my father explained that the barn was over 100 years old and a historical landmark, Karen told him he had no taste and that she would take care of the issue herself. That night, while my family was asleep, Karen snuck onto our property in the dead of night and set fire to our barn. The massive blaze was spotted by a neighbor, who called the fire department, but by the time they arrived, the old wooden barn was nearly reduced to ashes. Thankfully, none of our animals were inside at the time, but all our farming equipment, tools and decades worth of belongings were destroyed. When the police and fire investigators questioned the neighbors, they discovered the security footage of Karen sneaking onto our farm right before the fire started. When the police confronted her the next day, she claimed that she did us a favor by burning down this eyesore that was supposedly lowering property values all around. We were absolutely livid. Not only had Karen destroyed a central part of our farm and family history, but she showed no remorse. She truly believed that she had the right to decide what happened on our land, and even if it meant committing arson. arson. We pressed charges for arson, trespassing and destruction of property, and Karen is now facing years in prison if convicted, but no sentence will ever repair the damage done or bring back what we lost. The barn may have been old and imperfect in Karen's eyes, but to us it symbolized a lifetime of cherished memories and represented our family's humble beginnings. But in one spiteful act, Karen sought to erase our history simply because it didn't align with her own idea of beauty. Some people think that just because something doesn't directly affect them, they have no responsibility towards it. But true beauty comes not only from what one chooses to preserve, but what one chooses to respect. And some things like family history, tradition and heirlooms are far too precious to be destroyed by the whims of selfish entitlement. Update to the story: it's been a few months since Karen set fire to my family's barn. The police investigation and ensuing court case moved swiftly given the clear evidence against her. Several neighbors came forward to testify about Karen's pattern of encroachment and entitlement over the years. Karen pleaded not guilty, claiming that she didn't start the fire and that we had no proof it was her. However, when presented with the security footage showing her trespassing right before the blaze started, she changed her story. She began insisting that she did us a favor by burning down an eyesore on our property, thinking it would somehow justify her crime. The judge was not at all convinced by Karen's reasoning, pointing out that her actions were clearly illegal regardless of her subjective opinion of our barn. In the end, Karen was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. She has also been ordered to pay fines and restitution for the damage caused. However, no amount of money or punishment will truly make up for what we lost. Our barn may have been old and worn, but it held irreplaceable memories and represented the history of our family farm. While Karen's comeuppance gave me some sense of justice, it does little to ease the grief I feel over the loss of our barn. My father in particular has taken the news hard, as that barn held many memories of his childhood and time spent working alongside his own father. Even now, as I walk around our farm, I catch glimpses of where the barn used to stand, only to be met with emptiness. Despite this, my family has decided to move forward in a positive manner. We are currently in the process of rebuilding an even better barn that will honor the history of the original while incorporating modern improvements. And the next one is titled Family Drama. So I, 25 female, went out for dinner for my sister-in-law's 28 female bachelorette party this past weekend. Between my sister-in-law and my husband, 26 male, sister-in-law has always been the golden child of the family. Growing up, my in-laws coddled her and gave her everything that she wanted, while my husband always got the crappy end of the stick. She was always the popular girl in school, cheerleader, lots of friends, all the boys loved her. While my husband was always a little more nerdy and got picked on quite a bit, even my in-laws would give him a hard time about this and say he needed to be more like his sister. While fast forward to today, both my husband and I went to top schools, got our degrees, and currently have very well-paying jobs in tech. I'm not trying to sound braggy, this is just for context, but we live a very comfortable life. Sister-in-law still currently lives at home with my in-laws, where they foot all of her bills. She had my niece, 4 female, with her ex and is currently on marriage number 2. This past weekend I was invited to this fancy upscale restaurant in my city for my sister-in-law's bachelorette party. She just wanted to do a nice dinner. There were 8 of us in total. At the end of the dinner, the bill comes out and the waiter hands it to me. I'm sitting there confused for a second until sister-in-law speaks up and is all, "My parents and I were talking and were thinking, you and my brother can handle the bill for this as a wedding gift, and since you're not financially contributing to my wedding." I stared at her, shocked for a moment, and was like, "And you didn't think to bring this up to me beforehand?" She started going off about how we are so well off, what's the big deal, and she is sure her brother would not have an issue with it. I asked her why her fiancé does not foot the bill, or my in-laws, and where in her right mind she thinks it's okay to spring this on me. She started going on about how we are the wealthiest in both her and her fiancé's family, and that she did not think I would act like this and would say yes. I told her, "Well, sorry, but I'm not your parents. Don't expect handouts from me." She called me selfish and I called her an entitled brat, paid for my half of the bill, and then left. Well, as expected, my mother-in-law, sister-in-law, and even some of the cousins and aunts on my husband's side have been absolutely furious with me and are expecting me to apologize for the comments. I told them over my dead body. Husband is 100% on my side and we are debating on not going to the wedding. I was talking to my mom and she thinks I took it too far with the comments and should just apologize to keep the peace. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole? And yeah, Ripe Stars, let me know in the comments what you think about this. Someone on Reddit said, "Not the the a-hole, don't apologize. No matter how much money you make, you are not expected to 1. Contribute to your sister-in-law's wedding, what the hell, foot the bill for an entire bachelorette party that you were attending as a guest, de-escalate her temper tantrum once she didn't get her way, and the burden of payment for a bachelorette party usually falls on the maid of honor and bridesmaid and arranged for ahead of time or the bride. Comment number 2, not the a-hole, I guarantee you were only invited as a setup to try and make you pay. Don't go to the wedding, and I would honestly consider how much contact you want to maintain with sister-in-law and your in-laws moving forward. It's clear that they see you two as nothing but an ATM. And yeah guys, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss any of my daily uploads, and also check out my podcast by searching for Ripe Stories on Spotify, Amazon, Audible and other podcast platforms. You will often find exclusive episodes and early access to new content. Furthermore, please check out my Patreon by going to patreon.com/ripeyoutube or my YouTube membership program for even more exclusive stories. Thank you so much, and I will see you again tomorrow.
You want to eat grass too?